Раз, 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 два, три. Раз, два, три.
Thank you, Christian. Welcome everyone. I don't see you, but I hope that you can see and hear as well. The topic of the plenary is on display second. The way we are organizing the session is such that they will have the opportunity to go through some slides in order to introduce their activities, the commercial projects they are working on. I will follow that up with a number of questions. We will also open the floor for questions already from the beginning of this session via the Slido that hopefully will be displayed with a QR code on the screens. And please use them in case you have some questions. We'll try to save some time at the end of the session to go through them. Without any further ado, let me introduce you the speakers. Starting from the right-hand side is Jon Reijeveld, is the chief engineer of the exploration company. Christian Mender from Axiom is the executive VP for in-orbit in space solutions. And Manfred Jaumann from Airbus Defence and Space is the head of LEO and suborbital programs. So, without any further ado, we would like to put the slides on the screen, if possible. I'm not sure who is the first one. Is Axiom. Therefore, I would give the floor to Christian.
Terrific. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming this morning. My name is Christian Mender. I'm Executive Vice President for In-Space Solutions at Axiom Space. It's a role that really is focused on commercialization of space, where I focus mostly on product development and market development for the company. I'm going to share with you really quickly a little bit about what Axiom Space is doing if you're not familiar with it. We're building the world's first commercial space station. You can see on the graphic behind me a rendering of the space station. I'm going to talk to you a little bit how we're doing that and what sequence we're doing that in, and it'll set the context for the conversation that we're going to have here in a minute. The space station in and of itself is a modular space station. It's being built piece by piece and will be assembled in orbit. Each of the pieces of the space station are their own spacecraft. They have their own guidance, navigation, control, propulsion. They essentially get dropped off in low Earth orbit from a launch and then find their way to the platform. Now, one of the things that you can see in the picture on the right is Axiom Space Station is actually being assembled on the end of the International Space Station. We competed and won an award to build our space station piece by piece off the front of the ISS. And that's a great benefit to us, obviously, because we can borrow a little power, a little data, a little thermal heat rejection capacity, and grow our space station over time. But it also lets us work closely with NASA, who we hope is going to be a future customer of Axiom as they retire the ISS, and work with the other ISS partners as well to bring them all the way across the hatch and go on our way when the ISS is retired. So the first two pieces that you see on the screen are HAB1 and HAB2. Each of those will house 4 crew. They will have environmental control and life support systems that will support 4 crew. So we'll basically, when we have both habitat modules on orbit, we'll increase the capacity of the International Space Station by an additional crew of 8, and we'll be able to host those crew full-time if we need to. The third piece of the space station will be the research and manufacturing module. What it stands for, it's there really to support ongoing research and the increase in in-space manufacturing opportunities that we'll talk about a little bit today. And then the last piece that comes up before we separate and become an independent platform is what we call our power and thermal module, or a power tower. It adds all of the heat rejection capacity and the solar arrays, and actually adds a crew airlock for our EVAs as well over time. Let's see, we're kind of doing this in phases. We're building the first 2 modules right now with our partner Thales Alenia in Torino. They're building the pressure shell, and then that pressure shell will be shipped over to Houston, Texas, which is where our headquarters is, and we will do all of the integration and assembly of that module and ultimately ship it back to the launch site for launch. We're doing this, as I said, in phases. First phase for us is expanding access to space, and we're doing that with private astronaut missions to the space station. You may have seen the posters up on the screens, but we have had 2 private astronaut missions so far to the International Space Station, where we fly customers, whether they be countries or private citizens, to the space station along with their research programs. We have a 3rd mission coming up here in January. In late 2026, we'll start assembling our space station off the front of the ISS, starting with HAB1 and then HAB2 in order, and I think I have a quick video here that shows you how the assembly sequence works. And then ultimately we separate when the ISS is ready to be retired, or perhaps slightly before that. Goal here is to ultimately become a free-flying platform. So, and just to show that it's not a paper company, this is an image that's, quite frankly, about over a year old now, that just shows the components of the modules that are already have been assembled. They're currently being welded together in Thales, and we expect delivery next year. Let's see, there we go. So this is the assembly sequence. It's assembled robotically, just like parts of the International Space Station, where the HAB-1 comes up, brings a docking adapter, HAB-2 arrives. That arm that you're watching is actually the station robotic arm that we will use for a period of time until our Axiom arm arrives on its own. So we will have the ability to host visiting vehicles, both cargo vehicles and crew vehicles, off our space station. So we'll be able to bring crew into our modules, in addition to all of the docking ports that are still available on the ISS. The flower petal or the flower design that you see on the bottom is called an Earth Observatory. It's going to be the world's largest window in space. It is going to have some really huge acrylic glass panes, and it will be able to host 6 to 8 crew, and we expect it to be a great place for the crew, the joined crew on in space during operations that we're doing with the ISS to congregate, have meals, and just get some really amazing views in space. So that's a quick introduction. We'll have an opportunity for you guys to ask questions along the way, but I'm going to pass it on to...
Thank you, Christian. Thank you for that. We can move to the next set of slides. And it's Manfred.
So good morning, everyone. Also from the Starlab. That's another station after the ISS, or coming up now. This is a joint venture between the US-American Voyager Space and the European Airbus Defence and Space. We name it our new home in space, and it's a bit a different concept than that one from Axiom, which is good, that we go for different concepts, and we start together, maybe also, but also in competition to each other, to build a new economy in the low Earth orbit in the upcoming years. The right button. So the concept of this Starlab station is quite different from the Axiom one and the other ones of the Commercial Destination Free Flyer program of NASA. You can see here it seems to be very small, but it is not. The big module that you can see in the forefront of this slide has 8-meter diameters and is around about between 8 and 10 meters high. It has 3 decks. We can see a bit details later on that. It has also large windows, like the Axiom station. It is a metallic structure. It is made out of steel, and it is not built in a clean room. So it's a little bit a disruptive approach that's not so used in space so far. It is built in a shipyard, or will be built in a shipyard, then integrated the whole station on ground, and then it will be put into the launcher, and with a single launch to orbit it will be launched with an in-orbit configuration and a certification of not more than 4 weeks, and then starts a 30 years operations phase. So it's a typical robotic arm. We have it here. We have docking ports, of course. We have a very powerful service module with 60 kilowatts. And this in an overview. Now this is inside this huge module. This is one of these decks. It's very comfortable. We have in our consortium, besides Voyager and Airbus, also some hotel chains in. And these hotel chains are not preparing only a hotel in space, but also look after to be more or to get a more comfortable environment within the modules. Because if you look into the International Space Station as of today, this is like a submarine in a shipyard. It's not so comfortable. So we are working also on this on these things. So you see in the middle of that a galley. You see the racks typical for such modules, and in the middle you can see a vertical tunnel that connects all the decks together of this huge habitat. But besides this habitat, we have then an additional module. This is called equipment bay. This is for storage and stowage and some other things like sanitary things and installations, so that they do not pollute the habitat. And then we have a complex service module, the propulsion and power element, that includes also a tunnel, so that you, at the end of this service module, you can also dock. So it's very flexible, this concept. So here you can see another part of this module. It's an airlock for doing external payloads. As you may know, we have on the ISS, on the International Space Station, currently an external payload bay that's called Bartolomeo, and we want to continue also with the external payloads to serve the demand and the needs of our customers and to ensure continuity on this business outside the station. And there are docking ports for external payloads on the habitat and on the equipment bay. So you see here an overview of this module. It's really huge. We currently do an open competition for the manufacturing in Europe. We have in Europe 4 bidders currently that want to build this module. And very soon we will decide who will do it then. The end integration will most probably be in Germany, in Bremen, right besides the Weser River, because it's so heavy and so big that it cannot be transported on land and by air. It's roundabout 80 tons. So, and some details maybe on the shell. It's out of steel, as I mentioned already, and it's thicker than the modules are on the International Space Station. It's 1 up to 2.2 centimeters thick, and this ensures a longer lifetime because the lifetime is 30 years, and it has to sustain that. All the other elements are traditionally manufactured, and they will be exchanged maybe after 10 years, 15, 20 years. We have enough capex in our business case for that, but this heavy module cannot be exchanged, so it has to sustain the 30 years. So you see at the bottom line, you see a centrifuge. This is not necessarily installed in there. It's very flexible, the outfitting of this module. But we have the habitat from Airbus also ready for long-term missions, maybe to Moon and also to Mars. It can sustain that. So in 2023, this Starlab consortium is built now. We announced it beginning of August between Voyager Space and Airbus as the founding partners. We have more to join. The next ones will join by end of the year and by mid of next year, so that we go for a complete international environment with partners, risk-sharing partners in this joint venture company. The main company will be established in the US. But there will be subsidiaries in all the regions of the world where we have business as in Europe. So you can see here in 2028, late 2028, we will launch, we plan to launch with this single launch to orbit. And because this is high risk, I want to mention very high risk, that if it fails, everything is gone. Then we are procuring already now long lead items for the second one. We will not do a one station, we will do a fleet of stations. So this is a quick overview, maybe.
Thank you, Manfred. Thank you for your introduction. I will pass the ball to Jon as soon as these charts are on the screen again. There you go.
Yes, good morning everyone. My name is Jon Reineveld. I'm the chief engineer and co-founder of the exploration company, and I'll give you a short overview of what we're doing. So we heard just about 2 space stations, and we're talking about the vehicle to get you there. So we're offering there a Earth vehicle, so a LEO vehicle, and a lunar vehicle. So we didn't talk too much about the Moon, but I will talk a little bit about that later on. But our Earth vehicle is there to be affordable, sustainable, and open. So we want to bring it to you at a low price. so that our customers can send a lot of people up to space. But we also think it needs to be sustainable. So we're aiming at a vehicle that's reusable, that's using green, non-toxic propellants, and that can be refueled in orbit to be reused and to be updated for our next mission. So what are we doing right now? So we're working on our first demonstrator. This is called Mission Possible, and this is currently being integrated in our integration hall in Munich for a flight end of 2024. So it is for us mainly a re-entry demonstrator to learn how to build such a vehicle, how to bring it safely back home, but we're also flying payloads on it. So we're already having paying customers. They want to try out how it works to fly a payload into space, how to certify it, and how to learn what kind of experiments you can do and how to get them back home and prepare for a longer duration experiment. So as you can see, the mission is actually relatively short, so we're flying for 3 hours. This is for us mainly to de-risk safety aspects. I mean, if you're flying in orbit directly, you're doing your de-orbit burn yourself. There's a lot more scrutiny, but our goal is to move quickly. We want to prove one technological aspect and then move on to the next mission. So we're flying here, N24, we're being launched on Falcon 9, and after splashdown we'll bring back the capsule to Europe and bring back the payload to our customers. So this is actually our second mission. We're flying a smaller capsule beginning next year. This is completely ballistic, but on Mission Possible, the main additions that we're doing, so we're talking here about a vehicle of 1.6 ton, 2.5 meter diameter. And as you can see on the picture, we're having a propulsion system that's not on our first capsule, that's on the second capsule, which allows us to do some control of the attitude in orbit, but mainly control of the re-entry. So we want to make sure that our payloads get a smooth ride back home. We don't want all those G-loads. And of course, on the capsule, we want to make sure that the thermal loads are manageable, and we aim at the parachute opening point to make sure that the recovery queue can find our vehicle. So what comes next for us is Nix Earth. Oh wait, I'm going in the wrong direction. Is Nix Earth on Mission Odyssey. So this is a vehicle 4 meter diameter that's able to visit the space stations. So this one is aimed for visiting Axiom, visiting Starlab, visiting the ISS, and delivering up in a starting version up to 4,000 kilograms of payload. It's a combination between pressurized payload, unpressurized payload, and we're also looking as well to work on delivering consumables, gases, and also propellant. So this vehicle is built to stay into orbit 3 to 6 months, and you can fly it to the stations, but you can also fly it in a free-flying variant. This is mainly aimed at in-orbit demonstration or microgravity experiments, but the main part, we believe, will be to deliver cargo to the stations where there will be astronauts able to really utilize all the elements that you bring in. In our service module, we're also able to host bigger payloads. So if you want to build up your station, you want to bring new docking ports, you want to bring solar panels, there's room in the service module to allow you to just do that. And at the end of the mission, it's quite typical, we'll separate the capsule from the service module. The service module will burn up in orbit, and the capsule will return, have a splashdown, and afterwards will be refurbished, will be refueled, and will be ready for the next mission. So one of the major technological challenges for us here at is that we're working on, like I said, a green propellant. So we're working more not with the typical hydrogen NTO, but we're working here on a system based on H2P, hydrogen peroxide, and this we're currently already testing. So we did our first test together with different agencies as well in Europe, and we're aiming at having our first hot fire test by the end of the year. So this capsule will have its first launch in 26, so again, aggressive schedule. That will be in the free-flying variant so that we learn and we can aim at having the vehicle ready for docking the year after. So we talked a lot about LEO, but we're also looking further ahead, and that's our lunar vehicle. So you see here in the lander configuration, we call it Nix Moon. And this vehicle will be able to bring 3 tons of payload to the lunar surface. But we're also looking at the vehicle that's able to go to the gateway. So if you looked at Nix Earth with some adjustments, we're able to bring this to a vehicle that's able to go to the moon, to the gateway, and back to Earth. And here our main development that we're currently aiming at is what you see at the bottom of the vehicle is the engine. So this is our Hurricane engine. It's a cryogenic engine using methane and liquid oxygen. And this engine will have power of around 15 kilonewton, and this will be our versatile workhorse that will be able to bring us to the lunar surface if we want to go there, but it can also help us to go to the gateway and go back to Earth. And this engine is currently being hot-fired, so we already had our first hot-fire campaign over the summer, and the next one will come in December. So actual stuff happening there. So what are we aiming for? I already mentioned a little bit, but we have the space cargo. As we see there will definitely be a demand in that direction. Space demonstration, you have people that want to try out their technologies in space. Then we see all the interest in the R&D, in microgravity. So we have our free-flying capsule, but this is of course a lot more interesting to do in the space stations where you have the astronauts that can manipulate the experiments. We saw as well that there's some upcoming interest in space emotions. So people are willing to send their products up to space to give a unique experience that only space can offer. And one that comes way more into the view is the space safety. A lot of things are happening in space, and we're looking at how our capsule can help with monitoring what's going on there. So with that, Carlo, I hand over back to you.
Thank you for that. So we are basically on time. So we have understood that this is a session that is dealing with the development of infrastructure led by industries to support the development of the LEO economy and the moon economy itself. Therefore, my first question to the panelists would be, which are the main requirements, the essential features basically, that these infrastructures must have? So I would like maybe Manfred to start to elaborate on that, and whoever has a complementary statement is invited to do that afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So what are the main requirements for commercial business? It has to be profitable and it has to serve the customers. So we work heavily on our cost structures that are not comparable at all to that what we have in space today. It's not only that we go for different manufacturing schemes like the habitat that I mentioned. This means, by the way, instead of 6 years, only 3 years of manufacturing. This saves a lot of cost. It means also to work on the launch costs. You see the main requirements for that to be profitable is to go down with the launch costs. So we decided to go with a higher risk on a single launch to orbit. For example, the Starlab station was planned to be launched with 3 Atlas V launchers, and you can imagine what the costs are. It's in the range of 500 millions, and we do it with a different launcher, and we will be below 100 million. And so this is an argument. So this is one of the requirements. To serve the customers, yes. This is not agency-driven. It is industry-driven. And we plan also to go for different customer structures that only our anchor customers of the space agencies, and they have different requirements. And so we do an intensive marketing effort and being together with our future potential customers to meet their requirements. They are different from that what we have normally from the space agencies. It is industrial research. It's not institutional research. It is also science, yes. But we go, as the others also do, for industrial applications like manufacturing in space and all these things. So I stick a little bit away, go away from the low Earth orbit now to the moon surface. We as Airbus in my center, we do a lot, and since a lot time, on developing payloads, scientific payloads, industrial payloads, life support systems, and this opens a complete new business sector currently, and I want to take this as an example, and then I stick over to my colleagues. This is on life support systems. What we have in the International Space Station is a prototype of a closed-loop system. It's very advanced. It's an advanced closed-loop system, and we are producing in this closed habitat, we are removing carbon dioxide. And then we are producing oxygen, and we are producing water, and we are producing methane in a closed-loop system. This is the core of that what we want to do in terms of life support for closed systems in space. If you look then on the moon, you will have people on the moon living. We are going back to the moon to stay. So we will have habitation and we need life support systems. This is the first thing. Second thing is we have spin-offs and derivatives of this life support system. What is that? We have, for terrestrial applications, we have as one component of this closed loop system a so-called carbon dioxide scrubber. And we use this now in a pilot project, it's in the Netherlands, to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere in big scales and put it as a fertilizer into greenhouses. So this avoids a lot of waste of energy to produce this fertilizer with burning coal and gas and then produce this carbon dioxide. It's given, it's in the atmosphere, and we remove it from there. So this is a typical terrestrial application. The next one is to clean up atmosphere interiors of submarines. And it's working already, in this case, in the French military submarines. So, and this has a lot of benefits for them. But also on the moon surface, going back to space, besides the habitat, we are working on, for example, only one example, on power plants that can sustain the lunar night. The lunar night is 14 Earth days long. And you have to sustain that, you have to survive that, and you have to produce continuously power. And we do that with, again, components of the closed loop system, combined with a regenerative fuel system. And so we can do storage and providing power for the economy then that will evolve on the moon surface. These only a few examples for that.
Yeah, thank you, Manfred. I mean, I think that we will have time also to further elaborate on these. I would like to move on to next, which is why are we talking about commercial infrastructures? Do we believe that a space economy can mature and develop in the next years? Is it time to invest in space? What is the most interesting signal you see in the investors community towards commercial space players? Christian, would you like to elaborate a bit on that?
Sure. Is it time? I think the fact that we're having these kinds of discussions at conferences like this, and we're talking about the varied players that are entering the commercial market, including established companies like Airbus and startups like Tech and Axiom, just indicates that there's enough market signal that it's there. Governments, especially when you look at destinations in space, the International Space Station is reaching its retirement age. At some point, it needs to be retired simply because it's going to reach its end of its engineering life. But more importantly, it's also reaching the end of, in some ways, its political life. And the reason is not because it's not important. It is one of the most, if not the most impressive engineering feat that we've ever accomplished as humankind. But the reason is because the agencies that support the space station today are really interested in moving forward in exploring Moon and Mars and beyond. And they want to take some of the budget that it takes to maintain that infrastructure and move it forward. They know that commercial can come in and fill the gap. They've already done this with commercial cargo. They've done this with commercial crew. There's commercial activities going on and commercial collaborations with the agencies to go to the moon. And so it's the right opportunity to start providing commercial services to government. But beyond that, it's not enough to drive the economy of scale that you need for really supporting business in space. So as Manfred was talking about, we really have to develop new applications and new markets as well. Now that's the beauty of commercial space, is that it really opens up things that you can do in commercial platforms that you can't do on government platforms. John was talking about space emotions, I think is how you characterized it. And I think the activities you can put around media and marketing is a great example of something you can do and drive revenue and value for customers in space that you can't do on a government platform, not because it's not physically possible, but because it's not what the platform was intended to do. From another place, the signaling that I think is important is the sign that the capital markets are showing around space. There's an increased amount of investment going into commercial space endeavors, and people don't invest money simply because they think space is cool. At least I haven't run into an investor that talks like that. So at this point, you have to actually convince investors very heavily that there are market opportunities available, and the fact that we're seeing an increased investment over time really drives the signal home that, you know, the marketplace, including those that bring the financing to the table, really believe it's real.
Thank you, Chris.
Don't know if anybody else
Yes, yes, absolutely. Next. How do you see the impact and the complementarity of legacy and emerging players? I mean, non-space, new entities, new countries, SMEs, private capitals, big commercial players, and how their role to build up a space economy is merging together?
Yeah, it's a very good question. We see different actors now in the space sector that we haven't seen before. So we have the big players, like we have Airbus on the table, we have Axiom here with us, and Tech is a small startup. So here, what we bring from the exploration company is a novel way, a more speed-up way of working. It's partly driven, of course, by private investors that want to see a return. They want to see that we have products ready to get to the market. But space, there's a lot of domain knowledge, right? So we have here the legacy players that can come with the knowledge, that can come with the experience that they had. And we have the new players that are pushing, that are saying, hey, can we do this quicker? Can we do some early learnings and then scale up and not directly say, I want to have my huge system that's capable of everything ready on the first try, but say, hey, let's go with a more simple capsule, go with a simple station that we can build in a couple of years and then be able to expand it and to increase it. So modularity, I think, is a key factor, so that we're able to grow our stations, that we can adjust to future needs. We need to have interoperability, so here we need to have the different players talk with each other. We need to make sure that we can, with the vehicles, go to the different stations, that there's no problems with standards, and that we are able to create an ecosystem in which also new players are able to easily enter. Because if we close everything up, that also is for investors and for customers difficult to enter, because if you know that, oh, I can only depend on this one company to get into space, what if this company changes prices, or what if this company goes out of business? You want to be able to have a wide variety of choices that allow you to get to space and do the thing that you want to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want also to mention one very exciting thing that I experienced since more than 1 year now. It's the mixture between the old space and the new space. I think there is not an old space or a new space, but if you take that phrase, then you take the Starlab concept. We as Airbus, we are a big company, and we can build infrastructures, we can build payloads, we do everything in space. And then we teamed up with a startup, which is coming from the financial sector. And what we learned from then is all about speed. It's all about speed. For example, to build a joint venture at this scale, it's a big scale in space. It's in the billions. It takes in Airbus more than 4, maybe 5 years to do that. We did it in 7 months. And this is a game changer in Airbus. So our group, our industry group, is really learning from that. It's really learning from that. Vice versa, this startup coming from the finance sector is gaining experience in space and dealing with a big monster and learn how to deal with that. And so this synergy and this learning from each other is of utmost importance. And so this is what I experience, and I told it to you beforehand our presentation here. Within Airbus, I'm not old space. I'm a startup, I can tell you. Because we are violating all the laws, and it is allowed. It is allowed, and we are best practice meanwhile, and other projects are learning how to do that. We are building the complete design and architecture for the US station, currently in Europe. So we have completely different schemes in doing engineering, doing manufacturing, and we have a big experience in operations. And there, Voyager again is learning from us how to do operations of an infrastructure in space. We are doing it in the International Space Station for 2 decades now. And so we can benefit from each other.
Thank you. And I mean, this is all very attractive. And actually, next question is also connected to something Manfred was mentioning before, Jon. Which benefit the space economy, this sector of the space economy, can bring to the terrestrial economy? I mean, how do you see the potentials there? Can you elaborate on your point of view?
Yes. I showed a little bit on my last slide on the topic. So I think here one of the main key factors is if we're able to do research in space. So if we're bringing the price down of going to space, we're going to have companies that usually do not think like, oh, how can I develop my product further? What can I do with it? To start thinking about it. And here we have to look outside of the box. Pharmaceuticals, they might be willing to go with their product into space, learn what it means to be in such a harsh environment, look at the anti-aging creams that they are developing. That can be something that they say, hey, how that work in space, can I learn from that? And this is something that we need to learn in space and then bring back to Earth so that we can benefit on a larger scale from it. Because now if you look at, you're doing some research that's going into a small area that is not applicable to a wide population, that's not bringing the benefits back down to Earth. Of course, we can bring more people up, have them working there, but if we can enable research there on biological sites, on material sites, that is something that we can bring back to Earth and benefit from it.
If I may, the reason I joined Axiom and the reason that Axiom believes that where the market is really going to go long term in terms of generating the most revenues in space is really around in-space manufacturing. And there's two different kinds of in-space manufacturing. There's in-space manufacturing to bring products back to Earth, and there's in-space manufacturing to make products that you're going to use in space. When you talk about terrestrial benefit, it's really the first or the former that we believe is reasonable. And you hinted at it in terms of the research, but really it's about the product you can develop. When you take gravity out of the equation, and if you think back to all of our physics or biology courses when we took in high school or college, when you literally take G out of the equation, you can fundamentally change the way physics behaves in space. And different things like sedimentation and convection and surface tension change, which means that you can change the way you manufacture things. And when you take advantage of that in space and you couple that with the innovation that the commercial industry is bringing to bring costs down to space, you can suddenly close business cases for things that you can make in space and bring back to Earth. And whether those are medical treatments in the biomedical field or new medical implants, whether those are advanced materials that are used for different technologies that benefit on Earth, whether it's new semiconductors, these are all areas that Axiom's already exploring in doing proof of concept work in research, because we believe at the end of the day that really drives not just benefit for terrestrial, but it actually drives profit, not just for Axiom, but for all of the companies that are doing work in space. And that's really the force multiplier that we believe puts multiple humans in space, ultimately hundreds if not thousands. Because at the end of the day, having a functional, sustainable, thriving economy in space is really about having purpose and reason for putting people in space. And that's really about creating jobs in space. And from that perspective, that's where we think in-space manufacturing probably is going to bring ultimately the most terrestrial benefit from low Earth orbit, and then ultimately we expect to see that extensibility to the moon surface as well.
Thank you, Christian. You actually answered the question that I wanted to ask now, but therefore, Manfred, please go ahead with your answer to that, and then I will come back to focus more on the moon for a second, if you may.
Yeah, so looking for these terrestrial applications, beside all that what we mentioned already, there are a lot of opportunities, because look at the Earth from outside and you will see it's a spaceship. It's a closed loop system with getting some energy from the sun and so on, but it's a closed loop system, and our infrastructures in space are the same. And so we are forced in space since the beginning to take care of the resources that we use, and meanwhile we do spin-offs from that, and we can put it to terrestrial opportunities. One example again, but only one. On the moon we are forced to use the resources that are on the moon, because we cannot transport all the time between Earth and moon. So this is called in situ resource utilization. It is ISRO. And one example of that is, what can we do to produce and to look on the resources on the moon surface? We have this moon dust, it's called regolith. And with electrochemical processes, we can split this regolith and process it to produce oxygen and metal powder. The metal powder we can use to do manufacturing, on the moon, in this case on the moon surface, but also in space. And the oxygen we can use for then the habitation purposes and produce things or produce propulsion. produce methane. The terrestrial application could be we can produce metal or steel without coal mining. Imagine what that means on Earth as a terrestrial application. This is really, really exciting. So we have a lot of these examples that we can put on terrestrial applications, and Earth can really, really benefit in big scales from these technologies that we are forced to develop for our purposes in space.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I was just browsing through the questions which were collected by Slido. There is an avalanche of them, honestly. Therefore, I put the other ones in my pocket, and I would like to give the opportunity, at least to the panelists, to answer to some of the questions which are reported in here. So, first one is actually for the two of you, I would say. What should be the orbital altitudes for the new stations, and how shall the orbit be corrected? Christian, would you like to?
Should the orbit be connected or corrected?
Corrected. Which are the maneuvers that you will perform? And then, since you start from ISS orbit, I suppose that the answer is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I think our goal, the ISS, if you're not familiar with its orbit, it was set up to really cover as much of the human population on Earth as possible, and that's why it's at its orbital inclination. And from an altitude perspective, it's optimized to be close enough to be as most efficient with launch capability as possible, so that you use as least fuel as possible to get to orbit. And so, at least from an Axiom perspective, we're intending to maintain a very similar orbit and inclination in terms of altitude. How we maneuver in space is with propulsive elements. Manfred talked about it, but when you build a regenerative ecosystem, one of the byproducts of that system is methane. We're actually building a methane-oxygen propulsion system. So we basically produce our own fuel in space. So we bring water to space, we crack it for air, we take that hydrogen and combine it with the carbon dioxide that the crew emit, and then ultimately reuse that and turn it into fuel. And fuel actually will become a commodity on Axiom Station, because ultimately we'll produce more with the crew that we have than we will be able to use ourselves. But that propulsion that's built into all of the modules is what's going to be used to raise the orbit, just like the International Space Station does today. And quite frankly, it's going to be used for dodging a lot of space debris that's going to be even a more prevalent issue as we get going with more and more things in space.
Nothing to add.
Okay. Then, Jon, is about NICs. Where is it? How will NICs compete with the current dominance of Dragon? Will it be cheaper than flying a Dragon on a Falcon 9?
So, competing with?
How NICs will compete with the current dominance of Dragon?
Yes. So, for sure, we have already an established player like SpaceX on the market, delivering cargo and humans to space. Here, there will be place for a second vehicle. If you ask around, and you can only imagine you have a house somewhere on an island, and there's only one boat that can get you there, operated by one company. That's not what you want. So there will be an ecosystem that allows for a second player here. And for us, the main thing here to bring the cost down is to look on one side on simplifying the design as much as possible, spending your effort on the concept that will bring you the best return. And here we're launching on Falcon 9 for our Mission Possible, but for the NICS capsule itself, so the formative vehicle, we're making sure that it's agnostic, so we can launch with a variety of launchers. There will be the European launchers that we will be able to use, as our background comes from Europe. But we're also looking to be compatible with Indian launchers, with the future large launchers that are turning up in the US. So there will be a wide variety of launchers that we can choose from. And in the end, what we also should not forget is that in Europe, the workforce is actually a bit cheaper, which will help us as well to bring the price down.
Yeah.
A short remark from my side on this, from the perspective of a destination, of in this case Starlab, but it's the same for Axiom, I guess. We hate monopolists. And if we look for the resupply, cargo and also crew, we don't want to get dependent on one bidder or one offerer. So we put everything that is transport from the perspective of Starlab, we put it or want to put it on open competition, and then we will see, and then the price is one aspect, but not the only one. There are conditions, depends on what you want to do, with whom you want to do that, and there are also maybe despite it is commercial, some political impacts that influence this game.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just browsing to also the other question. Manfred, for you, apparently you have not explained how Starlab will be launched.
Oh, I explained it. We put it in the launch and then we blow it up. I know what the question means. We are under contract with a launch service provider, and we are in the financing and the funding scheme. And in spring next year, we will be able to announce it.
Thank you. What kind of radiation protection will be provided in the new stations, Christian? Radiation protection.
Radiation protection. There will be radiation shielding. Again, remember we're in low Earth orbit, so it's a relatively safe confines for a radiation treatment, but we will basically be providing similar technology that's on the ISS today. One of the things that we are working on, though, is some technology that allows us to recycle and compress plastic trash that is on the space station and turn it into essentially pucks that we can use to line the inside of the space station with over time. That dense plastic is actually a great shielding material, but we will start with making sure that our crew quarters are shielded and making sure that we have safe havens for crew in the event of a solar event or anything like that, just like the way that it works on the ISS today. And then over time, we'll be able to quote-unquote pave the inside of our space station, potentially with radiation protection, so that the whole module becomes a safe haven over time. But thankfully, we have the Van Allen belts to thank for most of our radiation protection, at least in low Earth orbit.
So this is we learned a lot from the ISS. And we know that our astronauts, cosmonauts, the crew is looking for the best place in the station to prevent radiation exposure. And so they are always going in the direction or in the vicinity of batteries or something like that that protects them better. And so we decided not only because of the lifetime to do something on a thicker material and steel, it's also for radiation. The radiation is much less, and this is good for the crew. And but this is only for the habitation. We will have dedicated crew quarters in the habitation module where we have additional protection shields against radiation.
Oh, this is a nice one for all of them. I was just trying to find something which would have put together transportation logistic infrastructure. It's about sustainability, and in particular, do you anticipate regulations such as zero debris or any sort of measure to be taken in order to ensure that your infrastructure will be sustainable in space?
So zero debris, what we're doing there for sustainability?
Not polluting the space environment with your vehicles. And
so, okay, one of the obvious thing with the capsule is make sure that you don't generate any parts during any phase of the mission. And for the capsule itself, of course, we want it to return in one piece back to Earth, so that's not going to remain in orbit. And for the service module, because we are in the 400-kilometer altitude range where we will have multiple stations popping up, for us the basic concept is to make sure that also the service module re-enters, so we'll perform our deorbit burn with the service module, we'll separate and then do the fine adjustment so that the capsule does not hit the service module on its way down, but the service module will not spend more than a couple of months in orbit after the end of the mission. So that's one important topic. The other one is then the fuels that we're using. As I said, we are developing there a green propulsion system to not have toxic materials, of course, in space. That's a little bit less concerning, but once we bring it down to Earth, we want to be able to, if you have a recovery crew, to be able to get directly to the vehicle and not have to worry about any toxic fumes.
I think Axiom, for us, all of our modules are designed with the end of life in mind, with our propulsion and guidance and navigation and control systems, so they are capable of re-entering themselves as their own individual spacecraft when they need to be retired. So we won't create debris with our spacecraft when they need to be brought home. And then we also will be hopefully intending to support a number of technologies that actually develop techniques for ultimately using our space station as a platform from technology development for debris removal and debris mitigation and debris recycling. We expect that we are going to have customers that want to use platforms like Axiom Station to develop those technologies that actually help, at the end of the day, clean up space. And that's another way we'll commit to sustainability of space over time, in the sense that we want to help use our platform as a test bed for those technologies that can then be used further out in different orbits to clean things up.
Well, since you have the floor now, Christian, I mean, this is an interesting, provocating question that I see in here about in-space manufacturing. In-space manufacturing, several use cases, implants, semiconductor, Z-plan, and so on. Many people are talking about it. It's not really taking off, and competition with ground-based activities is really visible. Will there really be a market there?
I think so, but I think we have to be mindful that we are very much in still the proof of concept stage. There's a lot of work that's been done on the International Space Station already to prove that you can make things in space, but there's still a lot of applications that are still being done to prove that you can make things in space. But that's only the first step. Then, if you can prove that you can make something in space, then you have to figure out how you can make it reliably in space again and again and again. Manufacturing is about quality control. Manufacturing is about being able to produce the quantities that your market needs and that your customers want. And so the second phase of in-space manufacturing is really about developing the manufacturing capacity and the manufacturing process that ultimately drives you to be able to scale that over time. And then the third phase of that is really scaling up. But we're still in the proof of concept phase, very much so. So I think that's why at least what we're doing at Axiom is making sure that we support the growth and the development of multiple markets at the same time. We support human spaceflight. We support in-space research. Those are existing markets today. We're developing in-space manufacturing. We support media and marketing opportunities as soon as our platform gets on board. That's another revenue opportunity. We support exploration demonstration technologies. You have to be a multi-use platform. I talk about this a lot. We have to be a training facility for astronauts. We have to be a research lab. We have to be a factory floor. We have to be a demonstration platform, and we have to be a green screen. And all of those things are necessary to start developing these markets. And then as those markets mature, with modular designs, you can add capacity to support those markets, or you can build bespoke platforms that support in-space manufacturing, support sports in space. Those are the kinds of things that you can explore as the markets mature.
Right, thank you for that. I mean, Manfred, there's a question that is quickly ramping up for you here in the ranking. Can you elaborate more on the current efforts Airbus is taking to develop ISRU capabilities for sustainable lunar and terrestrial development? They want to have some deeper insights on what you mentioned before. The efforts that Airbus is taking to develop ISRU capabilities for sustainable lunar and terrestrial development. Some of the examples that you were mentioning before with Roxy and so on, maybe they want to get some more details on what Airbus is doing.
Some more details?
In few minutes, just 2 minutes. Huh?
Yeah, okay. So, as I mentioned, it is not only important to produce power. I stick a little bit to power. It is very important to store power and to bring it into a loop with the resources that you have in situ. And this in this harsh environment, if you go to the moon surface at the South Pole, it is super cold. Super cold, and you have 2 weeks to sustain or to survive this night. So the combination of electrochemical processes with super advanced technologies, with electrolyzers, with more than 100 bars that we have developed in my center, allows to go for these processes in a big scale and to do it, as you mentioned, on a reliable basis. Because this is so robust and it has so much power that you can really go for, and we have the first demonstrators and prototypes in laboratories in test for these power plants. So this is one very, very prominent example to do that. Next one is storage of power. What do we use to store power? It is the metal powder. It's the metal powder coming from our Roxy electrochemical process to get out of the regolith this alloy and metal powder. If you burn it then in a closed system, you can free up the energy and then use it again. So this maybe as 2 examples for a little bit going more detail.
Thank you, Manfred. I'm just trying to save 2 last questions given the time that you have available One from Christian, that's interesting. It's inevitable, our author is saying, it's inevitable ISS will operate beyond 2030, maybe 5+ years or more. Since Axiom remains attached to ISS, is it a good or a bad scenario?
I don't agree it's inevitable. I agree it's possible, and I agree that it may be important, especially as we develop these markets and continue to want to evolve to a commercial system. But honestly, for us, we're good with either scenario. We're designed to separate essentially at any time. If there's a bad day in space, we can separate and survive. We can work with the ISS as long as it's there. One of the value propositions for Axiom Station is that we provide the short road to move all those customers off the ISS. So those users on the space station today, we expect and hope will become customers of Axiom Station tomorrow, simply because it's a very easy and cheap and affordable way to transfer all of that stuff across the hatch. And so for us, we'll stay attached as long as it makes business sense. But if we find that we need to separate because it makes business sense to do so, we can do that. And we'll be in position to do that anytime we want.
Thank you. Jon, last one. Capital markets are not favoring late-stage investments. Startup valuations are experiencing down rounds. How do you keep afloat in a situation like that?
For sure, it's currently not the same financial market that we had 3-4 years ago. It's what Manfred said, it's speed and deliver. Because if we show to our investors that we're sticking to the schedule that we set, we're sticking to the costs, that's the way to show that we're able to be trusted with our money. That's one, and that they're ready to make the next investment. Of course, here there's a big role to play as well by governments to support us through such periods, to be anchor customers, to say, yes, we believe in this company, yes, we will use their services. And then it's up to us as well to ensure that there's commercial traction that we hope to achieve, or we saw already with our partners that it is possible.
Thank you. I simply wanted to say that there were a few questions regarding pricing and services and so on. I suggest that those that are interested will get into direct contact to the service provider in order to get your price quotation. Manfred, you want to add something?
Yeah, if you allow maybe a word on something that we did not touch. Besides all these technical and economical things, it is more the entertainment part of space. We have always these topics, tourism, and we have a new topic, it's filming in space. And I've got some experience in my last 1.5 years on that with our partners. So one very new topic is this filming in space, and this is also one of the reasons of the big diameters of these modules, because you can film better. And I had the opportunity to visit with our partners together in California, film production companies. They are really working on formats of new series where parts of these series are in space. And this is completely amazing. It surprised me completely, and I was flashed by that, what power is behind that. And these are certainly also future applications that evolve later on maybe. This is super difficult. Tourism. One sentence on that, and then I stop. But this is you have to integrate it into the normal life of people. Otherwise, it will never work. So, with your salary that you get, with your holidays that you have to be able to go to space without any risk, and then it will work. Beforehand, it will not work. And I can tell you, we are really working very hard also on this topic, but it will last.
Thank you. Nice closing statement, I would say. It's 10 o'clock. We need to be ready on time. Please join me in a round of applause for our panel. And I wish a good continuation of the Industry Day. Thank you.
panelists, thank you so much for joining us today in this GNF panel about overcoming adversities, navigating through challenging times. The space sector, much like our experience here on Earth, is no stranger to adversity. From the technical challenges of space exploration, to the unpredictability of cosmic environments, to the financial challenges which all companies are facing at some point or another. Yet, navigating through these issues requires not only advanced technology, but unparalleled human resilience. It's often thought that these challenges are what make the most groundbreaking discoveries and push the boundaries of our understanding and capability. Today, with some esteemed panelists, we're going to dive into what the strategies are to overcome some of these challenges and talk about the difficulties that illuminate the innovations and breakthroughs that define our journey through the stars. Today, we're going to begin with Dylan Taylor. Dylan is a global business leader, a commercial astronaut, a thought leader, and a philanthropist. Currently, Dylan serves as the chairman and CEO of Voyager Space, a multinational space exploration firm focused on building the next generation of space infrastructure for NASA and other global space agencies. Dylan is a leading advocate of space manufacturing and utilization of in-space resources for the future space exploration settlement. In 2017, he became one of the first private citizens to manufacture an item in space. I'd also like to note that Dylan is quite the explorer. On December 11th, 2021, Dylan became just the 606th human to go to space as a part of the crew of Blue Origin's New Shepard Mission 19. Accordingly, Dylan earned his commercial astronaut wings with the FAA and the Universal Astronaut Wings from the Association of Space Exploration. So Dylan's going to give a presentation. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, so make sure that you scan and put in your questions. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Dylan Taylor.
Thank you, Kyle. Good morning, everyone. My pleasure to speak with you today about a little bit about my personal journey. So first up, this is I'll call this humble beginnings. This was actually my childhood home until I was about 8 years old. My parents got married super young as teenagers, and my dad was actually in Vietnam for a period of time. Thus, we were living in this house until my dad graduated from graduate school. So moving on, in my life, I came to the conclusion that you can be successful but not purposeful. And what do I mean by that? I had quite a bit of success in the business world, but sort of in my late 30s reflected on the fact that I didn't feel like I was actually living with purpose. A book that really changed my life is called The Last Lecture. It's not only a book, it's a lecture you can watch on YouTube. I won't give it away, but at Carnegie Mellon, they have a tradition that as a professor leaves the university, they give their last lecture. And Randy Pausch gave a very poignant lecture about what's truly important in life and following your dreams. Another thing I learned from a mentor of mine is that if you can't answer what your values are and what you think is important, then you haven't done enough self-reflection. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about what was important to me, what I admired, the qualities and individuals I admired, and then I sought out who in my life I wanted to emulate in those particular categories. So for example, work ethic, you can see my father there. Loving, kindness, giving, that's my wife Gabrielle and my Aunt Laura. It doesn't matter who these people are necessarily, but I would just encourage people to identify what's important to them from a values and characteristic standpoint, and then find people that, it could be even people you don't know, just people in society that you admire, and emulate them. So fast forward, I was living a life more purposeful in the space industry, which I love. I had a childhood dream of going to space, and it came true. December 2021, I had the privilege of being upside down, looking out the window at Earth. Total mind blower, something you can't unsee, something you can't unfeel. It truly changes you. And it's just an enormous gift that I'm just enormously privileged to be able to have experienced. This is me getting winged by Jeff. There was controversy around these US FAA wings. Our mission was actually the final mission that we're awarded these wings before the FAA got out of the business of doing so. And this is the ceremony for the FAA getting wings. The reason this is important, if you look at the right side of the screen, center, red jacket, that's Wally Funk, who should have been a NASA astronaut but was denied access to space, really due to sexism. So the fact that she was also winged at that same ceremony was really, to me, terribly important, and I really appreciated the fact I was part of that ceremony with her. Here's Richard getting his wings. He did his in a separate ceremony. Again, he gave a very impassioned speech at his private wing ceremony talking about how this was his childhood dream. And so it's great to see people actually experience this and pay this gift forward. So one of the things I've reflected a lot upon, you know, when you're enormously privileged and have these advantages to do these different things, I think the natural emotion is gratitude. And I think the next emotion is, how do you pay it forward? And the only thing better than making your dream come true is making someone else's dream come true. And so I founded a nonprofit called Space for Humanity, really trying to address access to space. We've sent 4 citizen astronauts to space. The first one is Katya, and I'll just talk a little bit about her resilience. So she crossed the border when she was age 8, undocumented, with her mother. Didn't speak any English whatsoever. And they were living in poverty in Los Angeles. Around age 14, she got a job at McDonald's. She has a dream of working for NASA. That's her dream. Fast forward, she works herself into community college, learns English, does extremely well, gets herself into UCLA engineering school. And for those engineers in the room, you understand how difficult that is. And then ultimately gets an internship with JPL. And it's tremendously gratifying to see how hard she's worked and how it's paid off for her. Fast forward, she was selected out of, I believe, 40,000 applicants to be the first Space for Humanity citizen astronaut. And she's now a celebrity. She now meets with the Mexican president on a regular basis on STEM education. She was on the cover of Vogue. They've made a Barbie doll around Katya. But more importantly, she's living her best life, and she's really promoting STEM education for women in Latin America. So the dream that I have is that everyone in this room can envision themselves going to space, and everyone in society can envision themselves going to space. So I'm working tirelessly to try to build infrastructure in space to get people out there. So truly a life with purpose. And as part of that project, the company I run, Voyager, we're focused on building a space station called Starlab. So that's my next mission, is to get this thing in orbit and built, and hopefully all of us can go there someday. So thanks for listening, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much for that, Dylan. So I have a couple questions for you, and audience, please make sure that you take a look at the Slido link there before if you want to ask your own questions. But curious, Dylan, starting from an engineer turned into a businessman, how did you ever imagine the future of your career in space, not only with all of the ventures that you've put together so far, but also developing a commercial space station? Can you talk a little bit about that thought process and that vision that you had?
Sure. Yeah, no, I appreciate the question, Kyle. I mean, honestly, everything that has happened has exceeded even my wildest dreams. And so the one thing I would also encourage other people to reflect on is, are you aiming high enough? And the fact of the matter is, no goal is too audacious, no goal is impossible. And even if you don't hit the target and you fall a little bit short, the higher you aim, the higher you go. So to be honest, Kyle, I never imagined that I would be in a position to go to space, to build infrastructure in space. It was a dream, and I'm just very grateful that I'm in a position to do that.
Thanks so much, Dylan. As a businessman, you understand the fluctuations in the market and everything that's been going on, but the space industry has continued to thrive even in the midst of the global economic downturn and the pandemic. What do you attribute to this, and how do you foresee operations like Starlab faring as obstacles continue in the years to come?
Yeah, I think capital markets are very fickle, as we know. They're on again, off again, but the trend line is generally up and to the right. So if you can create a model that is resilient, which is the key theme of this session, and isn't susceptible to minor perturbations in the capital markets, and you can ride out the rough waves and then ride the favorable waves, then I think you can be successful. I think what most people don't do is they don't stress test their model, and they don't have a plan B, C, D, E, and F. They haven't even thought through a what if. And I think, someone said, well, entrepreneurs are risk takers. I disagree with that. Entrepreneurs are risk mitigators, and they're very good at managing risk. So I think that ethos will carry you through any financial market that you might hit.
One last question for me, Dylan. You talked about this having numerous plans, and I think that's really important. And I think the thing that the space community is always trying to do is show how we can use space for the benefit of Earth. Can you talk a little bit more about the numerous businesses you have in Starlab and how you think that the technology that's being developed is going to benefit life here on Earth?
Yeah, it's a great question. I encounter a lot of people, like many of you do, who say, look, space is folly. We have many more problems here on Earth. And why are we focusing on that? I'm in the camp that says space is a tool for transformation. So put the science aside, put biopharma aside, put space manufacturing aside. Ask yourself, why do we have all these intractable problems? Why can't we communicate better? And why can't we solve things like climate change? And my view is we don't have the right perspective. And the one universal perspective shifter that I'm aware of and that I've experienced myself is space. So I think the more we expand our awareness into space and the more people get a chance to experience that, the more likely it is that we can tackle these challenges here on Earth.
Dylan, thank you so much for joining us today. Everyone, please thanks Dylan. So next, I would like to welcome Sita Santi. She's the Chief Exploration Officer of Space Tango, and she manages the implementation of the corporate mission and the vision. Prior to joining Space Tango, Santi led the space industry practice for the Boston Consulting Group, a global management consulting firm, and she made history as the head of human spaceflight sales at SpaceX, where she executed the first private spaceflight sale on the Crew Dragon on a lower Earth orbit free flyer and to the International Space Station, while guiding the global market for Starlink's expansion. Prior to SpaceX, Sita was the Vice President for International Business with the Sierra Nevada Corporation, teeing up the spin-out of Sierra Space, as well as the Director for National Security and International Business Development at Raytheon. Before joining the space industry, Sita amassed over 17 years of service as a career U.S. diplomat. She led the International Security Advisory Board, bringing A&D companies strategic recommendations to Secretary Kerry, and also served as the Chief of Staff for the Legislation Affairs and Senior Advisory for the Defense Sales to South and Central Asia. Her overseas posts include Croatia, Libya, Syria, and the Coalition Provisional Authority in Iraq and Egypt. Sita also has one of the most difficult jobs. She is a single mother of 2 teenagers. Please put your hands together for Sita.
Thank you. Thank you, Kyle. How's everyone this morning? Awesome. Okay. I have these notes, but I'm going to go off script. Is that okay with you? Okay. Namaskaram. Namaste. Salam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dobar dan I dobro ste došli. Bonjour et bienvenue. Good morning and welcome. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here today to follow up Dylan Taylor. I mean, how do you do that? That's just impossible. to talk about, in principle, not just my story or our stories on overcoming adversity and navigating through a challenging lens in the space industry, but really our shared stories. So, allow me to introduce myself. Sita Santi. Kyle very kindly described a little bit about my background professionally. One thing I like to do when I introduce myself is say something that you won't find on LinkedIn, right? Something you won't find on Instagram. Yes, I'm on Instagram, or Facebook, or any of the number of interviews that many of us have had the opportunity and the honor to do in our past. And I really am grateful to Kyle for introducing me first and foremost as a single mother of 2 teenagers, because I would argue that's probably the most important job that I've ever had, and by far the hardest, no doubt. And yet, while I'm a mother, I've also been bestowed this incredible honor to be the Chief Executive Officer of Space Tango. I began this role exactly 1 month ago today. I'm really excited to share that opportunity with you all, and tell the story not just about myself, but also what overcoming adversity has meant for Space Tango as a company in its journey, and essentially actually bringing it onto the international stage. One thing that's been interesting in my conversations with many of you in the audience whom I see some familiar faces, hi Aras, thanks for coming today. One of the things I like to tell about Space Tango is people have not heard a lot about the company. There's pros and cons to that in the space industry. Many space companies, I think we can insert fill in the blank here all collectively, have significantly captured public imagination, right? They've done so by testing the laws of physics. They've done so by commoditizing the price of, let's say, launch or the development of a satellite. We all know who these players are. But what's even more interesting is all of the capability that's been built on the back of the stories that are well known. So the story of Space Tango is, quietly, this company has become an industry leader in automated systems in the pursuit of health and technology manufacturing in space. Okay, that's a nice description, but what does it really mean? What are we really doing? And where are we going from here? Before we talk about where are we going, we need to talk about where we've come from. So here's a little bit about where the industry has been. A couple of interesting milestones, right? These are all familiar to us. Valentina Tereshkova in 1963, Apollo and Soyuz docking, 1975, the first spacecraft to fly by Halley's Comet nucleus in 1986, courtesy of the European Space Agency. Were those government achievements? Anyone? Yes, maybe. Were they industry achievements? They were human achievements. Pause for a moment. Those were human achievements. What is the purpose of this entire panel? Why are we here at this giant conference? Yes, we want to exercise deal flow. Yes, we want to convince customers that the services, products, and goods that we are offering will enable access to space because, as we've said, it's cheaper, it's easier to do, and the technology advances have been made. But at the end of the day, these are human individual achievements built on the backs of technologists and government leaders in history, and that's what exactly the space industry is particularly known for, right? So when we think about the benefits of space exploration, the space industry, and what we're all here to do together, notice I said together. Can any one company or can any one government achieve all of these things on their own? I would argue no. So when we consider those benefits, we must acknowledge the value of human cooperation. So why talk about human cooperation at all? For me, this time it's personal. So as Kyle very kindly offered, my first career was actually as a diplomat for the United States government. I'm honored to say I represented the American people over 17 years, and interestingly, in a lot of the roles that I held, space was quite often a topic. And part of the roles that I've held, you'll see in my interesting series of destinations, Croatia, Libya, Syria, Iraq, Pakistan, Egypt, a number of other places that I had little way stations along the way. How is there connective tissue between a career in diplomacy where I assure you there was no shortage of adversity in each of those roles? For my family, for myself, for my teams, for the people that I represented, for the friends that I made, for the partners that I had internationally. There was no shortage of adversity. Was that part of the space economy? Well, it was on the journey there. So then suddenly I end up in space industry, and yes, Inspiration 4 is one of the most proud moments of my career when we signed Jared Isaacman. How many people know who Jared is? Inspiration 4, right? Great mission. What an inspiring story to actually create a platform for private astronaut missions. Was there adversity along the way? Absolutely. So what are some of the common themes here? When we talk about the history of getting up there, what is it that keeps us going through adversity? Whether you're a diplomat that's trying to convince somebody on the other side of a negotiation to partner with you and to trust you, or you're a space executive and you're trying to convince somebody on the other side of the table to negotiate with you and trust you. That's the connective tissue. And it certainly has been in my personal journey. So the history of Space Tango has been the most exciting step along the way. This is a company that began out of the Kentucky Science and Technology Cooperation Center. It came out of the University of Kentucky. The genius Twyman Clements actually designed this company in order to perform research and development in microgravity for a variety of use cases. But what's exciting about all of that is that it's been done quietly. And the story of Space Tango is very simple. Flight heritage, customer heritage, technology heritage. So in order to continue and build on the adversity that comes in a lot of our personal stories, because I'm sure each and every one of you has experienced adversity along the way as well. The four of us just happen to have been selected to do this TED Talk, but any one of you should be up here telling your story. You still always take a moment to say, what did I learn from that? Why did I go through that? What were my primary takeaways? I would argue the three takeaways from my career, both as a diplomat, serving in some hostile environments, shall we say, as well as a space executive, is space can be a real enabler for technology transfer and knowledge transfer between peoples, between industries, between academia, between institutions. Space is a tool of economic statecraft. It is a venue where you could actually conduct a transaction that sets the course of history. But make no mistake, in order for those milestones to have occurred on slide 2 or whatever in my presentation, there was tremendous economic statecraft required, which means you have to convince the person on the other side of the table to negotiate with you and to trust you. Finally, especially today, but not only today, space continues to be one of the most powerful tools of foreign policy. People are everywhere at the conference today are really talking about the Artemis Accords. But it was interesting. I was doing this interview a couple weeks ago, and I was describing the International Space Station, which happens to have been the host for Space Tango's 261 payloads and counting of research and development content. And yet, the ISS, when I described it, I said, I think it's like Switzerland in space. It's always been, historically at least, a neutral zone, a location for civil and commercial cooperation where you can exercise economic statecraft and foreign policy. In order to find the resilience that we need, we also have to adapt with the technology that becomes available to us. So a main takeaway for us as an entire community here is that as the technology adapts, so must we as leaders, so must we as humans, and trust your talent on your team. So I'll leave you behind with a quote that always stays with me. Uzajamno razumijevanje bit će neizmjerno lakše korištenjem jednog univerzalnog jezika. Nikola Tesla. Presumably you all know who that is. I had to practice that quote, by the way. What does it mean? Mutual understanding will be infinitely easier if we speak the same language. So how do we find resilience and overcome challenges? This isn't my story. This is everyone's story. Speak the same language. Thank you.
Sita, thank you. Thank you so much for that. I was really impressed with the curation that you just ripped out. That's incredible. A few questions from myself, and audience, please remember to use the Slido app to ask any of the questions that you may have. First, you've obviously had an incredible career. If there's a young person that's in the audience and they're looking for some advice to how they could enter into the space industry, or particularly they're interested in the microgravity environment, what kind of advice would you give them?
Join us, right? That's a great question, actually. Thank you. I would say probably three things. One, do not be limited by what you don't know. And I say that because I, in many roles, particularly as I started in this industry, felt, well, I'm not an engineer, I don't have a background in engineering. I'm not a biologist or a chemist, which particularly for microgravity research can be a really advantageous knowledge base. But I do these other things, so maybe I can apply what I do know and not be afraid of what I don't. I would say the same thing to anybody who may have one particular skill set or knowledge base, or even just a passion for the industry, which is, do not be afraid of what you don't know. The second thing I would say is, think in terms of the creative applications for what problem you want to solve. And I say that because I think our industry is very full of rich talent of people who are problem solvers. Literally, people who have solved the problem of getting to the moon and back and destinations further beyond. And yet, if we are thinking about solving problems in some of the same ways, then we may not get to different destinations. So if someone is young, but they want to lean into their creativity, I think that's going to really set them apart. And then finally, courage. It takes courage to get up here on the stage and talk to you all today. I think it takes courage to approach someone at a conference or in any other kind of academic or professional setting and say, I would like to join your industry. I would like to learn more. I may not know much, or maybe I do, but I think courage is probably the one thing that I would encourage anybody, young or old, to maintain with them.
Thanks for that. So if you do see Sita somewhere in the conference these next couple of days, please feel free to reach out and say hello. We do have one question for the audience, and then I have one more question. But how can we ensure that space remains trustworthy to the public as a neutral and cooperative environment during turbulent times?
That's a brilliant question, especially since, as you heard, both in my personal journey as well as building off of Yuval Noah Harari's lecture yesterday on the safety and the ethics of technology, how do we ensure that SAFE is both secure from a technological perspective and also protecting intellectual property and protecting international sovereignty, but also trustworthy technology? I think what actually comes at the foundation is remembering, why are we making this thing, whatever it is that we're making? Why are we deploying this thing, whatever it is that we're deploying? And making sure that the answer to that question always comes back to the protection and promotion of human life somewhere. If we can always remember and anchor our industrial choices, our foreign policy choices, our national security choices, our technological development choices to the well-being of a human being. I don't mean humanity, because the more we talk about humanity, it becomes very conceptual and abstract. But if I can tie it back to a member of my family or a member of my team or community, that ethics is actually what's going to motivate us to develop the right kind of technological solutions that become trustworthy.
Thanks, and one last question from myself. So the year is 2033, 10 years from now. What are some things that you're going to be proud about that Space Tango has accomplished?
Oh, that was a softball. I like that question. 10 years from now, I will be proud that Space Tango went from 261 payloads of flight heritage in 3-4 years to 26,000 in the first 2 years of that decade. We will be able to scale our ability to do layer-by-layer deposition to create artificial retinas. Those artificial retinas will actually be tested in humans here on Earth. They will amplify vision capability for both those who can and cannot afford that level of advanced technology, and people will see. That, in 10 years, I'm really excited to say I believe we will be very proud of that. Also, I'm proud to, I would love to be able to say 10 years from now, we developed as a company the richest, most diverse, most creative and most energetic group of critical thinkers in the space industry. I think far too often a lot of both companies and teams can develop cultures inside them where you don't really look towards a diverse set of opinions, but that is absolutely a priority for us at Space Tango. So I have no doubt that 10 years from now we will be bigger and we'll actually be exponentially more diverse. By the way, we already have a 50% female staff, which I'm very proud of, so we're going to maintain those numbers.
I'm sure you're an excellent role model for that. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in thanking Sita.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you.
Next, we have Valeria. She's a long-term friend and someone I'm really happy that could come and speak to you and share her story. She studied at the University of College London, and she did her master's thesis on the strategic positioning of Russian space companies on the international market. She used to work at GK Launch Services, which is a daughter of Roscosmos. She provided launches for the Soyuz 2 for the international customers, and while she was doing that job, she met her current partners and the co-founders of Aerospace Capital in 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Valeria.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. I started to work in the space industry right after I completed my studies, because from a very young age, I always dreamed to work in this sector. I started my career at GK Launch Services, a commercial operator of the Soyuz 2 rocket launches from Russian cosmodromes. And there, I met my future partners, and together we co-founded an aerospace capital. That's a Russian private company that designs separation systems for CubeSats and microsats. At that time, 5 years ago, there were not many private space companies in Russia, and our pathway was full of challenges and, of course, opportunities. CubeSat spacecraft market is continuously growing, as pursuing the CubeSat mission is a relatively affordable way of joining the space industry and, of course, to test the new technology. I like the concept of CubeSat spacecraft. They all have standards to follow, and that unites all CubeSat designers globally. It also allows companies like Aerospace Capital to create a serial production of deployment systems to provide our customers CubeSats with affordable and reliable CubeSat adaptation, launch, and in-orbit separation services. Today we're here to speak about our pathway in these turbulent times, but I want to share some short information about us at first. So as of today, we successfully separated 54 CubeSat spacecraft into orbit with the use of our systems. Also, this summer, we launched the FreeU CubeSat platform with a picosat deployer, from which 6 picosats were successfully deployed, totaling the amount of spacecraft to 60. Our key technical solutions were flight-proven within multiple Soyuz 2 and Frigate upper stage missions, both from Baikonur and the newest Vostochny Cosmodrome. We started to design our separation systems back in 2019, and for the past 5 years, we had our ups and downs. The issues that COVID-19 epidemic brought were really challenging for our small startup back then. Our first launch mission with 2 deployers on board and 9 CubeSat spacecraft, from which 6 of them were for international customers, was scheduled for March 2020. And as you all remember, that was the first peak time of the pandemics, when air travel was limited even domestically, when quarantine and self-isolation was strict in most of the countries. Our mission was postponed to March 2021, a year later, and our, at that time, small team of actually less than 10 people were working really hard and partially remotely to make the mission happen. In 2021, all our international customers could reach Moscow for satellite integration with our deployers, and that would not be possible without the support of Roscosmos, which facilitated the participation of our team and our customers for launch activities. We successfully completed that mission, and after that we gradually economically recovered, and since then we grew a lot. Now you can see some photos from this first launch campaign during COVID. The photos are taken at our clean room at the Aerospace Capital's office nearby Moscow. And the photo on the right was taken at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, where we installed our systems on the frame of a legendary frigate upper stage. Lately, we started to have more domestic customers than international. And on these graphs, you can see a proportion of international CubeSat spacecraft versus Russian CubeSat spacecraft that were launched in our deployers. As you can see, on the first mission, almost 70% of CubeSats were for international customers. Last year, we launched 16 CubeSats for Russian universities. And this year, we had the launch with the highest amount of spacecraft that were launched in one mission, 29. And also, if we count Picasats, that gives us 35 satellites. And only 2 of them were for international customers. 11 of the satellites were launched for private commercial Russian space companies, and 16 spacecraft were launched for the Space P project. We are partners of the Space P program, which brings together school children, students, universities, professionals, and private companies across the countries to work and launch a real space experiment. As of today, with the use of our 9 deployers, the program has already 35 satellites in orbit, and in upcoming years, they aim to have 100 of them. You can scan the QR code to access the information about the program's missions, which are also available for joining for the international space community. On the photos, you can see some CubeSats that were made together with students and professionals. And we're honored to be partners of the program, and it's exciting to see how children and professionals work together across our whole big country in the space labs. Regarding the challenging times that we live, we continue to work even harder. And we are now developing our new product, low-shock separation systems for satellites of up to 300 kilograms. And our test flight for this new product is set for the next year. You can visit our website to see our news and follow us across the social media. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Спасибо.
Valeria, thank you so much for that. Thank you for participating.
Thank you. Special thank you, Kyle, for inviting me here today.
Of course, of course. So, a couple questions. The first thing I noticed was the growth of satellite launches that you've had over the last couple of years. So that was really fantastic to see. But obviously, much more domestic launches over the past year or two. Are you guys still open to working with domestic customers, and how are you overcoming the challenges associated with that?
So we're open for both our domestic customers and for international cooperation too. we really support the development of Russian CubeSat market. As before Aerospace Capital, there were only several CubeSats that were launched within years, and they used foreign deployment systems. And now with Aerospace Capital, we are more accessible for our domestic companies and for universities. So I believe we are one of the key drivers that support the growth of the CubeSat market back home.
Thanks for that. They have this saying that if you build it, they will come. Do you feel that GK Launch Services has helped to encourage more companies, or like you said, the school children to build satellites? And how do you think that's going to develop over the next couple years?
Yeah, for sure. The market and the space became more accessible in Russia because we are close to our customers, we are more affordable, we're reliable, and we also provide some complementary services, such as, for example, producing the test equipment for spacecraft. Also, we offer CubeSat guidance for testing to launcher environments. And taking this all together, I think we made a positive impact on the industry.
Thanks, Valeria. I have a lot of questions here, but I want to ask you a personal question. So the question from the audience is, how do you manage to be both sweet and knowledgeable? But my question to you specifically is that how did you get interested in space? And tell us a little bit about your personal journey from where you were to how you ended up into this job.
So I got interested in space when I was 13 years old. And my dad, actually, he was involved in space industry too. And one day he came home to me, and I was in the kitchen just eating, and he said to me something about rockets, how he likes it, and how he loves the space industry. And I thought, wow, that's so cool. And this feeling is still with me, and I can't imagine myself being in any other sector. Nothing excites me more than to be here around the international space community.
Valeria, one last question. What's the most unusual payload you had to integrate? And are there any limitations to the things that you can integrate on the launcher?
Yeah, we had not one, but one very special payload. So for the Space PE project, the students with professionals, they wanted to launch an experiment with the Sirene plant, and they made a small ecosystem for it in just a free EU CubeSat, and it had the water supply, lights, and cameras to see the process of plant growing. And actually, this plant is now in a book of records as the plant that is the most far away from our Earth.
Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me thank you, Valeria.
Thank you so much. Спасибо.
So last today is Manny Sharp. He is the Managing Director for UK and Europe at Orbit Fab, supporting the development of a thriving and sustainable in-space economy through the delivery of in-orbit refueling services. Manny has worked across the board on innovation projects from early-stage investment to commercial model development in the space industry. Previously, he helped develop Bryce Tech's international consulting presence into a revenue-generating and profitable business. He managed the analysis of a multi-billion-dollar portfolio of assets at Inmarsat and executed on cross-functional initiatives at top-tier investment banks. He sits on multiple advisory groups and committees, including the UK Space Agency's Space Technology Advisory Board, the UK Space Flight Safety and Regulation Council, the International Astronautical Federation Entrepreneurship and Investment Committee, and a number of others. He holds a master's degrees in space studies from the International Space University, where we studied together, I can say, and a bachelor's in computer science at the University of Kent. I consider Manny to be one of my best friends, so it's very proud to welcome him on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Manny Sharp.
Good morning, everyone. How's everyone feeling? Awake? Great. Well, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you to the host, Kyle Oceano, and also what a stellar group of individuals telling their personal journey in this industry. I'm really honored to be among that list. Does anyone recognize what kind of picture this is? Yes, correct. I mean, I'm at a space conference, so obviously I've got to have a satellite photo. This is actually the farm that I grew up on in rural Sindh in Pakistan. The farm is called Faridabad, which is named after my granddad, who was the spiritual and kind of the wise leader of the community. And one of the earliest memories I have from this place was when I was about 5 years old. Just imagine impoverished kind of rural community, no electricity, and no running water. But that has pros and cons, right? Particularly the no electricity part, because you can think about no lights. What does that mean? So when you're 5 years old, you look up at the night sky, what do you see? Just the most beautiful canvas of stars and the clearest view of the arm of the Milky Way galaxy. Just like, I have goosebumps just thinking about that right now. And ever since then, I was always kind of fascinated about space. And I remember going up to my granddad, you know, the wise spiritual leader of the community. I went and asked him, is it possible to go to space? And he said, no. You know, in this area, there's very limited education. People don't actually know that astronauts are a thing. The people go into space. And then to that I replied, well, what if we built an extremely large ladder? He still said no, but that to me was a lifelong challenge to not accept reality and try to accomplish the impossible. And when I was about 7, my family moved to the UK, and this passion for space continued to the extent that I was going to my local library and consuming every book on astronomy and space that I could. And the library ran out of books, and they ended up having to get more books from other libraries. So this passion continued. Fast forward a number of years, and this happened. No, you might be thinking I was Neo and I was offered the choice of a red or blue pill. What's true, though, is life is about choices. And I was at this corporate job in the financial industry at a little-known firm called Goldman Sachs. Been working there for a couple of years in the financial industry for several years. And I had this nagging feeling that, you know, this wasn't where I belonged. This wasn't the industry that I felt passionate for. And at this time, I didn't really know that space, you could pursue a career in the space industry. And so I did a lot of research, talked to people, and eventually came across the International Space University. And I'm fortunate to be where I am today, thanks to that education and the network of people that I was able to get to know. And it was actually at ISU where I ended up meeting my 2 future bosses, Carissa Christensen and Daniel Faber. From there, I ended up doing a few years at Inmarsat, working on a number of programs between the satellite communications, kind of the technology side, so procuring capacity, but also working with all of the business units, and learned so much about the industry. But at Bryce, I had my first opportunity to help grow the UK presence of a US-originated company. And with that, I got to learn so much about the industry. And there's no better mentor than Carissa. So if you ever get the chance to work with her, I would highly recommend it. I got to work with international space agencies, helping them with their policy, as well as VC firms on conducting due diligence for their investments, as well as private space companies who were looking to expand their businesses and a whole host of other opportunities. Bryce is also well known for some of their fantastic reports. I would highly recommend you check them out if you haven't before. And through that experience, I had a lot of challenging kind of experiences from how do you grow a whole new business, a whole new practice for a company in a completely different geographic zone to its origin. And I got to build more relationships in the UK and Europe and build my understanding of the sector even more. And then I had, thereafter, more recently, I had the opportunity to join Orbit Fab to lead their European presence and grow their business. And once again, I had to learn some new lessons about how do you scale up a company. And that took a whole different kind of mindset. Consulting, you do advisory type of activities, so you on a project-based basis, and you get to work with very senior people and get to help them navigate challenging times. But the idea of actually kind of leading a company and being the person at the helm of making some of those challenging decisions means that you have to have a different frame of mind and how you tackle those challenges. So I've been fortunate enough to be now at Orbit Fab, leading their European office. And Orbit Fab, for those of you who don't know, is a company focused on building the in-orbit propellant supply chain, where we've been working on a number of missions in the US and in the UK, and excited to see what the future has to offer. I've also had amazing opportunities meeting the UK, His Royal Majesty the King. That was quite a unique experience, I must say. But also getting to work with some fantastic people, really, really smart people who are trying to do what's not really been done before. We've not been able to refuel satellites at a scale that we want, and it's a major problem in the industry that we launch assets and then we throw them away. It'd be crazy if you drove your car once to the destination and then the fuel ran out and then you ditched it on the highway. That's basically what we do with satellites. So we need to change that. And most recently, I was fortunate to be involved with the fundraising aspect of Orbit Fab, where we completed the Series A. As you can see, if I can go back, it's loading a bit too quickly. The blue line is the space SPACs, and we started raising funds kind of towards the bottom of that for our Series A. As you can imagine, it was quite a challenging environment to be doing this. Yeah, we were really at the bottom of the market. So it took us a bit longer, but we were fortunate to close our Series A earlier this year of about $28 million. So yeah, we're excited to be building this future, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Manny, thank you so much for that presentation. We have quite a few questions from the audience, and I have a couple questions myself. So first question, you could be seen as an expert in helping US companies expand into the UK. What are some of the challenges that you faced in doing that, and what do you think are the exciting opportunities that exist for companies that want to expand into the United Kingdom?
That's a great question. Obviously, for companies that are US-based, there's so many different geographies they could go to. And the way I see it, the UK is a fantastic launch pad for going into Europe, going into the rest of the world, because you get to test a market and then you get to understand where you want to go from there. So in terms of some of the challenges, you know, language isn't a barrier, so it's an opportunity. I would say there's a smaller, in terms of the budgets, shall we say, compared to the US. Though in the UK, those budgets are increasing for space. And if you're looking at the in-orbit servicing manufacturing market, it's very suited for that. And so I feel like I'm talking more about the opportunities than the challenges. But one of the challenges that the industry more generally has commented on is skills. How do we bring the right talent to the table for building this future? And that is certainly one of the challenges that is evident. Although, as we're a relatively smaller company, we haven't had to come across those issues just yet. But I imagine as you scale up, those will become more and more evident. Yeah.
Thanks. So you mentioned about meeting one of your best friends and your future bosses at ISU. How do you make the jump from a connection through your network to a concrete job opportunity?
Very good question. I would say it has a lot to do with being curious and asking questions. In fact, I believe it was Carissa was doing an external talk at ISU, and I think we both raised our hands at that talk. And from there, I reached out to Carissa and just wanted to kind of understand more about the industry. And from there, I was able to learn about what Bryce was doing, and just kept in touch over the years, and making sure that you're not losing contact with the people that you meet at these conferences, I think is really, really important. And similarly with Daniel Faber, I kept in touch, we tried to keep up to date on what he was up to with the different ventures. I originally actually met him when he was leading Deep Space Industries, which was focused on asteroid mining, so kind of way out there stuff. My thesis was actually on asteroid mining, so he was a very great kind of resource to understand what the opportunities were and feed that into my thesis. So I think it's all about being curious and asking questions and staying in touch with people like that. Yeah.
Two last questions, Manny. One regarding your finance background. How has that helped you navigate the space sector and in your current positions? And I'll ask the other question as a two-part. What's next after the Series A? Any plans for OrbitFab?
So how has my finance background helped me in my career? I would say it's helped me tremendously to have that commercial awareness and business understanding of where the pitfalls might be. Having worked at an investment bank, I got to see from the other side of the table what they would consider and some of the challenges that are there, not just at a kind of micro level, but a macroeconomic level as well. So having that understanding and the context within which the space industry sits is so powerful, I would say. And then the second question was on
the series. After what's
next?
Series A?
So yes, we, as a startup, we're always interested if there are entities that are looking to invest. We've done our Series A. We're good for a while, but if there's any folks that are interested, strategic investors or such, we're always happy to listen and give you a sense of what we're doing and how we can help build the future.
Ladies and gentlemen, please help me thanking Manny Sharp.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
So that brings us to the end of the panel today. I'd really like to thank everyone for your participation, for your questions. And I hope that the stories that you heard today help you personally as you navigate your own personal challenges. We had the opportunity to hear stories from all across the world, various issues, various problems, but there's always some solutions. And if you have the chance, make sure that you try to stop some of the speakers. I think they'd be willing to talk to you more. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for participating.
LEO. It stands for Low Earth Orbit. That's a portion of outer space about 250 miles up, and for over 20 years it's been home to the
This afternoon for me, because I'm still working on Washington time, but good morning to all of us here in Baku. We're going to work on keeping this on schedule. The next panel is, I think, an exciting one, so I was happy to be asked to come in and moderate for it. And this is looking at the future of low Earth orbit, sustaining vital research, commerce, exploration through private space stations. Now, there aren't very many private space stations now, but people are looking forward to there being more space stations. The speakers we have in the panel tomorrow, Robin Gatens from NASA. She's director of the International Space Station program right now. And so, of course, which is one of the biggest and most active laboratories in low Earth orbit. We'll have Jeffrey Mamber, who has a long experience working not only with commercial space stations in terms of his prior experience with Russia, but also is deeply involved in private space station development now. And then we have my friend Masami Onoda from the Washington office of JAXA, and Japan is planning its future space station as the International Space Station transitions to more work in the commercial sector. So you're going to get a NASA perspective and looking forward civil space. You're going to get an international perspective from one of our major partners, and you're going to hear a commercial perspective from someone with long experience in private space activity. I'm told that there's videos associated with each one, so I will simply pray that the technical people can bring this up. But I will look forward to them. And then what we will do is, after remarks and video, we'll shift into Q&A. Questions are coming in, would come in on Slido. I have an iPad here, so I will hopefully pick some good questions. If not, I'll make some up. And we'll proceed, really starting with Robin. To introduce yourself. Yes.
Good morning, everyone. I feel like I'm far away. We left you a seat, Scott, so otherwise we can slide down. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Robin Gatens. As Scott introduced me, thank you. Director for International Space Station. I'm at NASA headquarters in the Systems Operation Mission Directorate. And my role there is dealing with overall policy, strategy, and budget for the International Space Station program. And I work a lot with our stakeholders in Congress and in the administration. And one of the aspects of my job right now, it's keeping me very busy, is this LEO transition from International Space Station to commercial space stations that will follow in low Earth orbit, and figuring out all the complexities associated with that transition plan. So we are moving from an era of owning and operating a government platform together with our international partners to an era where we're going to be governments are going to be purchasing services from commercially owned and operated platforms in low Earth orbit. And how do we do that transition? It's really important for us to provide continuity, and we'd like for this transition to be seamless so that users coming to International Space Station today don't have to worry about what happens next. We have that figured out. The capabilities are going to exist. International partners, we have a way for international partners to participate as we continue in low Earth orbit together, doing things as a partnership as well. Another aspect is our space station, International Space Station National Lab, that brings in other users, not NASA, to do commercial research and development, other government agencies. So how will that work on commercial space stations? So all of these kind of complex, interwoven strategies are what we're working on today to make this transition smooth. And with that, I will have a video we can queue up. It kind of shows from the NASA perspective this vision for what's to come.
LEO. It stands for Low Earth Orbit. That's a portion of outer space about 250 miles up. And for over 20 years, it's been home to the world's most unique laboratory, the International Space Station. In this weightless environment, the space station has enabled scientific and engineering breakthroughs that just weren't possible on Earth. It's taught us more about our planet, physics and biology, and it's preparing humans to travel farther from home than ever before. And as the space station approaches its end of life, America will maintain leadership in LEO by enabling a new era of commercial spaceflight. Through the Commercial LEO Development Program, NASA is working with industry partners to develop the first generation of commercial space destinations. These will be privately owned and operated space facilities, where NASA will be just one of many customers. This new orbital economy will stimulate commerce and usher in the next generation of aerospace engineering, opening the door for scientific discoveries and private astronauts, allowing NASA to continue its critical research in LEO, supporting deep space exploration and bringing those benefits back home to Earth. Welcome to America's future in low Earth orbit.
I like the pictures of the space station that show it very messy with lots of wires and equipment. So this is not a science fiction space station. This is a real research facility and been in use for many years.
It's very busy. We have crew and cargo vehicles coming and going. Yeah, lots of research. We've really built this capability up for the past 2 decades, and now we're in our 3rd decade, and just using the heck out of it, and we'll continue to do that through 2030.
Very good. Let me turn to Masami next, also one of our key partners on the space station.
Yes, we have been a partner of the International Space Station for a long time, since the beginning, and proud to be so. We contribute the Japanese module called Kibo, that means hope, and to conduct experiments, science demonstrations, technology demonstrations on it. And we also provide logistics support by HTV, and now going on to our enhanced version that will be called HTVX. Also, we have a control center in Tsukuba, and together with our launchers, and astronauts, of course, that's what we contribute to the current space station. Going on, we have last year in November, the government of Japan agreed to extend the operations of our Kibo module and the ISS participation through 2030. We're happy to do so and also be part of the transition studies to find out what we want to do after that with our commercial partners. And it's a very exciting time also. We have a dedicated team of commercial business development that's newly created in JAXA. And we have a whole group working on overall space cooperation, what we call co-creation, with the commercial partners. So it's really international partnership, commercial partnership, and a new era for Japan and internationally, I believe. And I will have, can I show the video now? I will have a video to show. I'm going to, because the subtitles were in Japanese, I have to speak over it. We did away with the subtitles, so you won't be seeing anything if I didn't speak over it. So I'm going to try to do that. For that, I'll come over here. So feel the heartbeat of the Earth. Oh, okay, we'll start it over again.
Now the Japanese video.
The Earth is ever-changing. Feel the heartbeat, and we reach for the highest. Open a new stage. JAXA will bring all our towns for new businesses together. Co-create. Break the tradition, break the barriers. Different people come together and fight the challenges. JAXA will change with all that aspire the same goal. Thank you.
J-Spawn.
That's terrific. And you know, how is it? I want to maybe ask how this program has excited or connected with the Japanese people. You know, in terms of public interest in space. There's been a long interest in space, of course, in the U.S. for a long time going back to our original history. But how has this been in Japan? How is this connecting?
Oh yes, I'm sure it's exciting a lot of people, not just the industry, but also JAXA, to enter this new stage of commercial collaboration. You can feel the excitement in the video that they made. It's almost the best video I saw coming from JAXA. So, we have maybe now up to 100 or so new, what we can call new space, that's been going on for 10 years almost now, but and now we have like an ecosystem in Japan that's exciting all of us. In my office, I have visitors almost every day from Japan and the US industry talking about what we want to do, and also the government is trying to add a new function to JAXA to be able to fund these commercial entities. So that's just also being discussed now. A change of the system is being discussed, and we'll see that coming very shortly.
Very good. Jeff Manber.
Thanks, Scott. I'm Jeff Manber, President of International and Space Stations for Voyager Space. Also chairman of the board of NanoRacks, a company I co-founded that's grown into one of the largest commercial users of the International Space Station. And it's great to be on the panel because it's as we're learning, as we all know, we're entering a new era now where the public-private partnerships between the private sector and the space agencies of the world, they're growing more robust. I forgot, you don't like the phrase public-private partnership. But anyway, forgive me. And so it's growing far more robust. And what's happening is more and more space is becoming a normal place to do business, where the private sector takes on more and more risk, puts in capital, and for today, a lot of the existing infrastructure has been paid for by the space agencies of the world, but especially in low Earth orbit, that's going to change as we move along. And in the United States, with NASA and the private sector, 10, 12, 14 years ago, we began an experiment many of us wanted very much, where NASA made the decision, I believe it was Robin's office, to start the cargo contract, where cargo would go commercially would go to the International Space Station instead of what we did previously, which is where cargo and crew, the astronauts, went to and from space via the space shuttle, a government-owned and operated vehicle. And so first we started in the United States with the cargo, and then we went to crew, and that was an amazing evolution that NASA was now trusting the private sector to carry into space or transport into space their astronauts. And so those two legs prepared the way for what we're about to embark on today, which is the destinations in low Earth orbit are about to become privately owned and operated. And it's very exciting for me. I've waited a long time to be able to participate. And now we're all moving. There's 4 teams that are moving to offer various proposals to NASA on how we can have destinations moving forward. And it's very important to point out that NASA is one customer of many. They've given Voyager about $160 million, which is a small fraction of what we need. And we announced a few weeks ago that Airbus in Europe is our partner, equity partner in a new company we formed, Starlab, and there will be more equity partners to come. And what we're trying to do, what we're doing at Voyager Nanoracks is we're looking to replicate the International Space Station partnership in a commercial manner. And so if we can show the video, and then I'll sum up my remarks. So if we can see the video. And so we also have left behind having voiceover, by the way, so it's just it's a lot more international. So Starlab has a couple of, we think, advantages, certainly different characteristics than some of the other teams. Starlab will be 8 meters in diameter, far larger than the others, which are 4 meters as they use the ISS diameter, specifications. Also, this is incredibly important to me. We're not going to be in the ISS orbit. That orbit was chosen, the higher inclination of 51 degrees above the equator was chosen to satisfy the Russian objectives. And I was there at the time when we made that decision, and it worked well for 20, 30 years, but it's more expensive to have cargo go into the higher inclination, so we're going to choose a lower orbit. We're not sure exactly what. And we're inviting others who own and operate space stations to join with us in a cluster of commercial space stations, and that way we can share resources, we can share cargo, we can share astronaut delivery, and really begin that critical ecosystem, which is what this is all about. And finally, I'll end with saying I'm different from some of my colleagues in the space industry in that I don't really focus on the hardware. For me, it's about sustainability, and we're working to develop a string of science parks around the world that will be dedicated to in-space research and in-space manufacturing, but using technoparks or science parks as a business model for how we make sure that we sustain the station, and we finally reach that point where we make the breakthroughs in materials and pharmaceuticals that everyone from NASA, JAXA, the private sector have always dreamed about. So I'll end it there.
Very good. So one of the questions coming in on Slido, I'll start with, is maybe one of the biggest obvious ones is, and maybe each panelist could maybe respond, how many private space stations are realistically estimated to come into use in the next decade? And do we expect most of these to be launched from the U.S., all from the U.S., none from the U.S.? What are, how many are we talking about? 1, 2, more?
Well, I can start. As many as we can get. From a NASA perspective, the more the better. We like to have diversity, and we like to have competition, and we like to have redundancy. So today we have entered into agreements with 4 commercial space station partners. Voyager, NanoRacks is one of them. Blue Origin, Axiom Station, you probably saw these in the video, and Northrop Grumman. And that's for initial development. We intend to, in 2025, put out a request for proposals for a new competition. It's not a down select among those 4. It's a new open competition. We anticipate our phase 1 partners to propose, but there could be other companies that propose for certification and then services, where NASA will buy what we need, other customers buy what they need. And those will be awarded in 2026 for initial operating space stations beginning as early as possible. We hope to have an overlap period before we retire the ISS, where we have these commercial space stations perhaps starting by 2028. And so we see a range of capabilities. What NASA has put forward is our initial set of needs and our forecast of what we intend to buy, and that's 2 crew continuously and about 200 experiments per year, but that's our initial estimate. We're working with our user community to update that, and we hope to put out formal requirements later this year.
So for Japan, or globally, we're working together with NASA and the commercial partners, not just Japanese, but also US partners, to find out what the business case would be that would sustain the times after the ISS as it is now, and how to transition in that. How many would probably depend on how successful we are in finding out that demand and also being able to support that. And we have had a call out for proposals to study a next possible module, a Japanese one, that could be up there to whichever space station is up there at a point of time. This is all still concept study, and we're working with a Japanese company to find out what options we have for that. So that's one of the, well, hardware-wise options that we're considering. And otherwise, as you saw in the video, we're very excited to work with companies to come up with, well, non-space or space ideas to have activities in the low Earth orbit.
I think if 10 years ago you had asked the panel, NASA's ending the space shuttle program, how many private launch vehicle companies would there be in the decade? We might have said 4, 6, tried to stretch our imagination. And yet no one in this room can even name the number of how many launch vehicle companies exist today in the world. It's been extraordinary, the change in policy and technology. Launch vehicles and space stations are not the same. Space stations are far more complex, but I think the same is going to happen. I think there'll be about 8 to 10 stations in the next 10 years. Maybe 2 from the United States, supported by NASA. You have India, you have China. I think there will be a space hotel. I think there will be a fuel depot. I think there will be a warehouse. And I think we'll cluster together, except for what's ever in the ISS orbit. And I think there'll be an ecosystem, and supported by this revolution in transportation as well. So it's a really wonderful new era we're beginning now.
So that creates this image of, when we think of space station, we think of a place that does research, and the astronauts sort of live there, and what you're describing is more of a differentiation. Yes, there'll be a research facility, but maybe dedicated to different kinds of research, and maybe there are support facilities and logistics facilities. So when we say space stations, it's more than just a place. It is really more of a network.
Right, that's what markets do. That's what commercial markets do. So at Starlab, we're not focused on space tourism. We can support it. Our partner, in addition to Airbus, is Hilton, that's doing the crew quarters, and they're going to look wonderful. But we're focused on research. We're very passionate that let's get those breakthroughs in research and manufacturing we've always dreamed about. But I think there will be tourism platforms. So you're right. I believe that the markets will have distinctions, carve out what these platforms do and focus on.
Well, then let me ask, Robin, you're deep in the middle of current station operations and research and so forth, utilization that's going on now, probably at a record level. How ready is the science community, whether in the US or worldwide, for this transition? It seems like they've gotten to the point where they now know how to use space, the ISS, and now we're going to kind of switch on them. We're going to say, okay, now we want you to look at these other facilities. Are they ready for this? Is there preparation? Do you see gaps that they need to do? NASA needs to do more with them to prepare? How ready are the customers?
Yeah, we're getting ready. We're really starting to peel the onion of what all this means. As you mentioned, the International Space Station capability grew over time, and now it's an incredibly capable platform. We have a lot of facilities on board. It's not just the modules, it's what's inside. It's all of those research facilities that are needed. And so one of the things that we have to plan for is, yes, the new platforms, but also what are all the facilities that we're going to need inside to enable this research? Are we going to be able to salvage pieces from the International Space Station and somehow move them over or rebuild them or maybe refurbish a ground spare? You know, I can say from a NASA perspective, you know, we've got some really high value facilities on board and we don't necessarily have the budget to rebuild all of them. So we've put out our initial needs and what kinds of capabilities that we'd like to have. We're getting feedback from the platform providers as to what capabilities they'd like to provide, what capabilities that we may have to bring ourselves, and then we're working with our international partners to do the same thing and try to figure out how do we bridge this transition so that we do have all of the capabilities that we need and it is smooth. You know, yes, I think there is going to be some reset in the beginning where maybe we don't have everything that we like to have in the beginning, but then it'll build up hopefully very quickly and we'll have even more.
Well, Masami, I was going to ask, it was mentioned earlier, we're probably not going to see a lot of these facilities at 51.6 degree inclination, that there'll be probably other inclinations. Maybe there will be one at 51.6, maybe salvaging things that came off of the ISS or repurposed. When you think about JAXA's research priorities on the ISS, do you have a view yet on where you want some of these private facilities to be, or is that too early?
Probably too early. We are still studying options for all of that, but wherever it goes, I agree to what Robin said. We'll try to support our ongoing research, science, and technology demonstration that's going on. We want to also contribute with our HTV, enhanced HTVX. That's a major part. So yeah, but for the orbit, we're still weighing options.
Jeff, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, we at Voyager, we've already begun that transition for the research community. We've partnered with Ohio State University to set up the Science Park dedicated to in-space research and manufacturing, and we held our first workshop, and we got about 60 universities. And one of the things that, they came in really cautious and really nervous. This is all going to be new, but we're already working with the leading researchers on the design, on how we're going to have the equipment. This is a chance to take the lessons that we've learned from the, decades of operating ISS and do a restart. And also, let me say that from my perspective, we want new hardware. The hardware on the ISS is now a lot of it's several decades old. You want the industrial base to produce and use new research hardware, research equipment that's manufactured in 2025. And so we're getting the research community's feedback now, and they're pretty excited in the lessons that we're applying and the ability to have state-of-the-art hardware on board a new station.
So not a lot of large pent-up demand to salvage things off of the station.
I am just different. I think that there's very little value in trying to reuse research. I mean, if a lab closes in Paris, you don't hear that they're taking, 20-year-old research equipment and reusing it for state-of-the-art laboratories. The industry, I mean, obviously the evolution of research equipment is amazing what can be done today. Even then, when I started NanoRacks, what can be done today in the human robotic interface and robotics and artificial intelligence and the software, the algorithms. We want Starlab to have the latest. And so that's important to us, and I believe will be our customer base.
So it's the researchers and the research they do, not the equipment they do it on, that matters more.
Correct, but they're coming from leading laboratories. And always at NanoRacks too, we've tried to make sure that the research being done on the International Space Station is done on the same equipment that you have on the ground. So if there's a difference in the research results, it's not because of the hardware, it's because of gravity.
Robin, I wanted to ask, you're again at the center of looking at what this private sector is offering, and different ones are coming to you, and NASA feels it's chosen some of the best partners it could have for competition on the private sector side. So when you look at that, without, maybe doing impolitic comparisons, what are some of the strengths and weaknesses that you see that the private sector folks are bringing to you? So you're coming from all your experience on ISS, and then you're seeing these private sector ideas coming in. When you look at that, what is it that makes you go, gee, they better think about this? Or what makes you go, that's really neat, I wish we could do that?
Yeah, I'm excited about some of the new capabilities that Jeff was just talking about, because it's true, some of the equipment on station has been around a while, and we've learned a lot, and if we were to rebuild it again, we would have some more automation, for example, additional capabilities, and so that's exciting to see. I think what I like the focus on research. That's really important as the government. That's what we're planning to do with these commercial space stations. I like to see the diversity in markets that are being pursued. I think combining a research facility with tourism, well, that's interesting. That could be a little bit challenging, but that's interesting to see. And I really like the wide range of capabilities that are starting to pop up. We have the commercial destinations that are going to be permanently crewed, and that's ultimately what we're trying to enable for our needs. But also we're seeing really innovative ideas in free-flying, single payload kind of capabilities, or sortie-style capabilities that some of the researchers are very excited about as well, because not every payload needs a permanent stay, long duration in orbit. And so these other additional capabilities, part of the ecosystem, is pretty exciting. I'll also just put a plug in to this conversation about standards. We are trying to work with because we hope to have a number of platforms and users are worried about where my equipment will go, will it be able to be interchangeable on these different platforms. We don't necessarily, as a government, want to dictate, oh, you must have a standard payload rack like the station. But there are some kind of minimum, I'll call them box level payload standards that I think that would be smart and we're starting to think about that and talk about that with the commercial partners.
Yeah, so yes, we talked a lot about research and science on the space station because that's what we're doing now, and we want that to continue even after. That's our demand. So I'm in Washington, D.C. now for 5 years, have a small office there, and there we liaise with NASA, with the White House National Space Council, with the Department of Commerce, and all the industry and academia. It's a lot. And in doing so, and Japanese and the US and sometimes other countries also for some reason come to us, and we do hear a lot. And from that, what strikes me as being very new and exciting is the diversity of the ideas that all these different, even within commercial destinations, so there are a few, but they have vastly diverse ideas. And maybe at some point it will converge, and we have to maybe consolidate, but the diversity at the moment is wonderful. And we have many different ideas because it's, all the more because it's not governmental. And for that, new demands and new ideas such as tourism, but not just that, and also ways to work with international partners is different in each proposal as their technical way to deal with the existing ISS, how they want to work with the ISS and work to go further in the future. They all have different ideas. And also, am I talking too much? It's okay. Also, also when we have Japanese companies come into that, and of course, most of them, there are some traditional, of course, the manufacturers, but a lot of the business partners are very new to space. So they come in with all these new kinds of business ideas, and also we have what we traditionally call trade companies come into this, and the trading companies have changed their mode of work from just being go-betweens between Japan and the other countries to being more of a catalyst for new ventures and investment and seeking equity. And so I see all this very dynamic and different from, of course, the time we started the space station, and the options we have are numerous, and finding out which is the best one is the challenge we have for the next few years.
Very good. So with the a topic of conversation in many parts of this conference, sort of sustainability of space activities, and particularly talking about mega constellations and low Earth orbit and so forth. And so a lot of attention has been paid to avoiding collisions between mega constellations, dealing with space debris and all that sort of thing. What consideration do you give to, or have to give toward private space stations and worrying about sustainability, worrying what the orbital debris environment looks like, measures that may be taken? So we know the space station has had to maneuver to avoid debris. Is this going to be just a routine part of what private stations have to deal with? Or are there areas where improvements could be made such that it's less of a burden on the private stations? How do you think about that risk? Maybe start with Jeff.
Okay, thanks. We take it very seriously, and we've reached out to different organizations to begin a discussion of, you know, if we imagine a cluster of space stations in a single inclination and orbit, can we declare that, you know, we won't purposefully blow up any satellites in that orbit and inclination? Can we get an agreement among nations that maybe, we know for political reasons you won't get an agreement in general, but maybe we can get an agreement that at, you know, 40 degrees and such, you won't purposefully cause an increase in orbital debris. That might be doable, but we do think it's just something that one has to endure. I mean, that's just the reality.
Are you going to go hire people to clean up your orbits for you?
Yes. I mean, that's why this is a great new market niche, isn't it? I mean, so, you know, the strange thing about commercial markets is one part of it may be causing a problem and the other part comes in to solve it. And so we see that with the orbital debris companies emerging. And let me say something, if I may. When you know, I've been doing commercial space for a long time, and when we started out, there was an assumption that this was an American phenomenon. You know, our markets allow for this, our markets are more open, but there was an assumption at the start of commercial, what we now call commercial space, that this was limited to the United States. And I'm very proud that, you know, the way the evolution and the relationship has developed between NASA and the private sector, I'm really glad to see that. But at the same time, I am so happy to see, like, the activities in Japan. I mean, who would have thought 20 years ago that Japan would emerge as just this incredible ecosystem of smaller companies working on a whole range of activities. I'm jealous of they're still investing. The capital is flowing in Japan still. And in Switzerland, they have orbital debris companies, in the UK. And so I'm getting to the answer to your question. So one of the amazing things is that commercial, the non-government services, hardware, solving our problems in the environment of space, it's now an internationally commercial marketplace. So that's really one.
Very good. Robin, any thoughts on ISS collision risk?
Yeah, it's a growing problem, as we know. ISS is, the debris environment has about doubled that we have to deal with, and we have to do more and more maneuvers, debris avoidance maneuvers. So it is a growing problem. I am encouraged to see a lot of commercial companies being innovative and trying to address it. And so I have hope that future commercial space stations may not have to do what the ISS is having to do today.
So in thinking about the point about growing commercial industry, multiple stations in orbit, thus giving researchers potentially more opportunities to different places they can go. So let me say, maybe ask an obvious question, which is China. China has a space station. They've said it's open to international participation. And where, if you're a researcher outside of China or the US, and you're looking to put a payload up, a package up, want to go do your science, how do you find the information necessary as to how to integrate on board? Are there areas where, at a technical level, there can or should be interchanges, maybe using the IAC to put a plug in, for standardization of researchers? You talk about scientific equipment, you know, on the ground needing to match what's up in space. Great. I mean, good, actually, serious point. Are there ways that can be led to standardization of research such that researchers can have multiple opportunities to fly on different facilities when they go forward? And what's most important? Is it power? Is it size and weight? Is it comm channels? Is it who builds it? You know, where is standardization going to come from that will be of interest to the researchers who are looking at multiple stations they may use?
I'll take a stab at this delightful subject. Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
That was a loaded question.
Yeah, first, yeah, it's a loaded question because, Professor, you know, you jump to the assumption that a researcher could move from a Chinese platform to, let's say, an American platform. You jump to that assumption. And one of the unfortunate things about our industry is how much governmental influence, the politics, regulatory regimes, some justified, some might feel not justified. But so it's very hard to anticipate a researcher. Now, it can be done for certain countries here at the IAC, more difficult for the United States today. I will say that I was very pleased that several years ago at NanoRacks, I was able to coordinate and do I think the only commercial Chinese payload that has gone to the International Space Station. It was a Beijing University doing a synthetic DNA project, and we got to understand the Chinese payload integration. They had flown on a satellite. They have satellites in China that you can recover the payload. And they had done some of the research on the synthetic DNA on one of those recoverable satellites, and they wanted to use the ISS, they didn't have a space station at that time, to see if they could replicate the results of the influence of the environment of space on DNA. And we learned at NanoRacks their payload integration, because they just handed over the same papers, and they were in Chinese and Mandarin, but we learned. And that's the value of cooperation. We learned how they were doing their payload processing. And so I'll say one other thing, it's not quite what you're asking, but I am astounded, I am shocked by the quality of the research hardware on the Chinese station. The sum of the hardware on that station is far ahead of anything on the ISS. They have perfect zero gravity environment boxes. They have certain nuclear clock, quantum mechanics, and in satellites. Some of the things that they are doing is really worth us looking at and seeing either whether we can replicate in the West, or one day, if the politics allows, to be able to use their platform. But to finally answer your question, as Robin was saying, it's important to everybody, to NASA, to JAXA, to the research community, the private sector, that we have commonality. And that wasn't done here. The Chinese elected to use more of the Russian standards. The United States has gone in a different direction, and so it would be very, very helpful. And it is power, of course. All of us who travel know that the power is important. It's the hardware. It's the environment, the microgravity levels. And there's a lot. We're still at the very, very beginning of research in space. And so I guess I'll conclude the loaded question, the difficult question, by saying commonality would be very nice once the politics allows a researcher, at least from the West, to go back and forth.
With whether or not you want to address China, I'll leave that to you. But issues of standardization, interoperability, lessons learned you want to take from ISS to these future private platforms?
Yes, so sustainability, Japan, is very, very keen on supporting, and we place a lot of importance on this subject. As you know, at the G7 hosted in Japan, the outcome document had one full 1.5 page about space sustainability. That was really surprising and very, very good to see coming from that high level. So we have a high political support for that, and also JAXA supports works with the industry to support that and develop the technology for debris removal. We're also working for space situational awareness. So speaking about, you mentioned China. This is, there's no borders problem that we have a proliferation of spacecrafts in the low Earth orbit. Nobody doubts that now. And we have to tackle that. Also going on to Moon and Mars, opening our horizon a little bit, we have the Artemis Accords being signed, and this is a similar but different subject where we have to find the rules of the road when we go out all together, we have to find a way to do this together. effectively and without hindering the sustainable use of outer space, whether it's low Earth orbit or Moon or Mars or elsewhere. So that's what we're working on very much now. When it goes to commercial, I believe when commercial activities become global as this, as the problems are, I hope we have more interoperability and standardization to be able to support a global commercial ecosystem in the low Earth orbit, probably first there and beyond.
Yeah, I would just add that there's a really critical part of the ecosystem, and those, we call them implementation partners on the International Space Station today, but they're the companies who've gotten very, very good at holding a new user's hand, figuring out what they want to do, what is their research about, figuring out what hardware payload box it needs to fly in to conduct that research, and then integrating that science into the ultimate payload that will fly on the International Space Station. And that is going to continue to be critical going forward. And I really think those partners, if they are able to work interchangeably with any commercial space station, then they can provide that important bridge so that a user can come through and reach an agreement with that implementation partner and fly to whatever space station is best suited for their research. And so I think that's a really critical part of this ecosystem that we sometimes forget to discuss. We focus on the platforms, but I think those implementation partners are key to helping this ecosystem as well.
So if this is probably sort of late in the game now, given that ISS planning is only through 2030. But one of the questions coming up on Slido was, what's the procedure for a different country to integrate a new module onto the ISS? And maybe we could extend that question to maybe thinking about Gateway in orbit around the moon. If we have new countries come up that want to participate, maybe we're not involved right now. Hypothetically, what would be the process for starting that discussion?
Well, we're kind of out of ports on the International Space Station to add something as big as a new module. That's an exciting idea. However, we continue to increase the number of countries that are participating on the International Space Station. We're up to 117 now. So that's really exciting to see, and more countries are finding out how to do space research, and they want to do more. They're flying astronauts. We're doing all we can through the International Space Station. I think going forward there'll be more opportunities for those countries to partner with some of the commercial platforms, perhaps through Artemis in our Moon to Mars program, and contribute things potentially like infrastructure, like modules or transportation or other capabilities. Some of the science hardware I was just talking about are excellent opportunities for countries to participate by bringing things like furnaces and laboratory equipment. And so I think there's all kinds of capabilities that can be integrated into these follow-on platforms.
Speaking about how many countries joined the ISS, I was before this IAC started, I was in the UN IAF workshop that was taking place here from Friday. It was, every year there's so much increasing interest from the emerging countries to join. We have been working with UN USA to conduct a project called KiboCube, where we deploy microsatellites from the Japanese module Kibo. So it's not just research, but these technology transfer capability, capacity building on Earth, and then going on to launching and becoming a spacefaring nation for the emerging countries is really a big deal, and that's been happening a lot. And something like that, the commercial opportunities can give even more opportunities. And for modules, as I said, we are considering a module. And that's in study, so we want to think about a lot of different ways to have more participation, make space more accessible to commercial partners and international partners, and we hope to find ways to do that.
Yeah, so I think it's maybe editorial comment here that the IAC, which was created to promote international cooperation, peaceful uses, and progress for humanity, and so forth. That, interestingly, one of the biggest steps or substantive contributions to making that goal a reality has been the emergence of the private sector, and not just in the U.S., but internationally. The emergence of private sector operations that then produce on-ramps for developing countries really at all levels of development, now have an opportunity to get on board and participate meaningfully in a way they didn't have before. And so not only building their own capacity, but building experiences through partnerships with other countries or the development of their own industry. So I would say the promise of the IAC is in part being fulfilled by the growth of the international commercial space sector. That's my editorial comment today. Any last comments? Any of you want to add?
International has never been more important, and we kind of see it. The whole concept of international cooperation is threatened today, and I really am saddened by that. So I support the IAF and everything that they're doing to make sure we have that dialogue.
Okay. With that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and give a round of applause to our panelists. And like a good space program, we're ending roughly on time. So thank you very much.